You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. For our book club today, we're reading from a book edited by Cynthia McKinney. It's a compiled collection of essays titled How the U.S. Creates, shall we say, S-hole countries. I can't say that word on the air. And this is from her introduction, a deeper look at Trump's epithet, S-hole country. I wish I could take full credit for the idea of doing a book on President Trump's unfortunate characterization of some countries as S-hole countries, verified recently by fired ex-White House staffer Omarosa Manigault. The idea was brought to me by a Facebook friend, and I immediately saw the brilliance of that idea. Although at the time the president tried to walk back the revelation that he used such language to describe certain countries, he couldn't help himself. And during the visit of Nigeria's president to the White House, he doubled down on that characterization, saying that certain countries were tough places to live. It was only recently that Omarosa confirmed that, yes, the president had described certain countries as S-hole countries. The media had a field day with the, at the time, alleged remarks. Steve Dempsey of the Bay Area News Group compiled a slideshow of cartoons from national news outlets that lambasted the president. Lambasted, whatever it is. The Mercury News Online ran the slideshow that included hilarious cartoons by Rick McKee at the Augustus Chronicle and Bob Englehart with Kago Cartoons and others. Mark Schuller, writing in the Huffington Post, noted, Haiti has been targeted for its decisive role in challenging what Southern planters, including 8 U.S. presidents, called a peculiar institution. The Haitian Revolution was the first time slaves were able to permanently end slavery and forge an independent nation. It was also a tipping point in U.S. history, leading to the 1803 Louisiana Purchase, paving the way for U.S. manifest destiny stretching from sea to shining sea and eventual dominance. Chicago, the country's third largest city, was founded by a Haitian, Jean-Baptiste Pont-du-Sable, who Haitian historian Mark Rosier called an agent of the Haitian government to pursue a pro-freedom international policy. End of quote from that. Jen Kirby went farther, and in an online media outlet, Vox, interview with a Stanford University history professor, the word eugenics was used as a descriptor for what Trump's characterization actually represented. Stanford professor Anna Minion said of the interview, what Trump said was basically a form of eugenics, in which he's saying, this is the population we want, people from places like Norway, white people. We don't want people from African countries or from Haiti. That's what's really symbolic here. Minion makes it clear that in the U.S. immigration debate, legality became a proxy for race without anyone overtly talking about it. Ryan Teague Beckwith and Maya Roden of Time magazine added their 2 cents worth to the discussion of the president's choice of words by choosing to discuss the immigration laws that occasioned Trump's telling words. They began the discussion this way. President Donald Trump's S-hole countries comment ricocheted around the world, spurring criticism from U.S. allies, rebuttals from Americans with roots in those countries, and condemnation from some in his own party. Reaction was swift around the world, including from those countries so characterized by the president. Zambia even humorously featured Trump's words in a tourism advertisement at Appeal. My Facebook friend thought that the president's words should occasion a deeper look at what these so-called S-hole countries were, how they were created, and why they continue to exist. And that is exactly what the contributors to this book do. Sort of like the proverbial turtle sitting on a fence post. You know, these countries didn't get the way they are without some help. And it's precisely that help from the U.S., its allies, its multinational corporations, its military, and United Nations peacekeeping operations in Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, which it also controls, on which this book focuses. Thus, the U.S. relationship to conditions in these countries is clear, from U.S. military occupation of Haiti, financing of death squads in El Salvador, and support for dictators in all of them, indeed, all across the African continent. Therefore, for our purposes, an S-hole country is a country whose residents present quality of living conditions that can be tied to historical or current U.S. foreign and military policies that have negatively impacted the ability of that state to deliver quality of life policies to its residents. In this regard, for too many U.S. residents, the U.S. itself could be characterized as an S-hole country, resulting from its deliberate choice to fund the war machine and corporate policies that produce negative consequences for the countries and territories, in some cases colonies, that are profiled here. The United States, as itself a S-hole country, could be explored in much depth in future efforts. The characterization of certain countries as S-hole countries has captured the imagination of the global community, whether the localities and individuals concerned are for or against U.S. President Donald J. Trump. This book seizes this unique moment when attention of people inside and outside the U.S. is focused on the president's alleged words to explain the structure of international politics, the conditions inside certain countries, specific U.S. policies that created or maintain those conditions, and the consequence of those policies on U.S. residents themselves. How the U.S. Creates S-hole Countries by Cynthia McKinney, or edited by.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Happy Friday, TGIF, Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak, whatever it may be for you. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. We'll be taking your calls on whatever you would like to talk about. I just want to toss a few things in here to start the conversation, as it were. It turns out that Section 6103 of our tax code says that any official of the federal government who touches the tax system, basically, who's involved in the tax system and fails to follow the law must be removed from office and faces up to 5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. Now, right now, that would be Steve Mnuchin and IRS Commissioner Charles Rettig. Rettig could also lose his law license. They're both facing 5 years in prison. And even if they turn over Trump's, because they're hiding Trump's tax returns after Congress asked for them, which the law says the IRS shall provide them. And even if they turn the taxes over today, the law further says the provision requiring removal from office for anyone who conspires or colludes with another person. And Mnuchin has acknowledged, this according to David K. Johnston last night on Lawrence O'Donnell's show. Mnuchin has acknowledged that Treasury officials talk with White House officials, and Rettig has indicated that he's spoken with Mnuchin and other Treasury. I mean, this is a conspiracy, a criminal conspiracy to break the law. Meanwhile, let me refer you back to November 13, 2017. This is a year after the presidential election. As stories were coming out in the press, Julia Yaffe, writing for The Atlantic, the headline is "The Secret Correspondence Between Donald Trump Jr. and WikiLeaks." She writes, just before the stroke of midnight on September 20th, 2016, this is at the height of the presidential election, this is 3 weeks before the election in November, the WikiLeaks Twitter account sent a private direct message to Donald Trump Jr., and it said, quote, "A PAC-running anti-Trump site, Putin-Trump.org, is about to launch. The PAC, we have guessed the password. It's Putin Trump. And see the about for who's behind it. Any comments?" Donald Trump Jr. responded to WikiLeaks saying, I don't know, but I'll ask around. Correspondence continued between Donald Trump Jr. and WikiLeaks, presumably Assange or somebody speaking on his behalf, until July of 2017. This is a half a year after Trump was inaugurated. Back in 2016, on that same day, Trump Jr. received the first message from WikiLeaks. He emailed other senior officials within the Trump campaign, including Steve Bannon, Kellyanne Conway, Brad Pascal, Jared Kushner, telling them WikiLeaks had made contact. He then forwarded the email to campaign communications staffer Hope Hicks. On the first day of the DNC, WikiLeaks released emails stolen from the DNC on October 7th, less than an hour after the Access Hollywood tape was dropped. WikiLeaks dropped the John Podesta tapes. And then on October 3rd, they wrote to Don Jr. again. Hiya, it'd be great if you guys could comment on or push this story. It was about Hillary Clinton saying she wanted to drone WikiLeaks in an email, or it was a quote from her. Trump Jr. said, already did that earlier today. It's amazing what she can get away with. 2 minutes later, Trump Jr. wrote again saying, what's behind this Wednesday leak I keep reading about? It was about Roger Stone having tweeted that, quote, Wednesday, Hillary Clinton is done, hashtag WikiLeaks. On October 12th, the account again messaged Trump Jr. saying, hey, Donald, great to see you and your dad talking about our publications. Strongly suggest your dad mentions this link if he tweets, if he mentions us. It was WLSearch.tk. There's many great stories that are missing. By the way, we just released Podesta Emails Part 4. 15 minutes after that came out, Donald Trump himself tweeted, very little pickup by the dishonest media of incredible information provided by WikiLeaks, so dishonest rig system, et cetera. It goes on from there. I'm not going to read all the stuff, but it's one of them was suggesting that if Trump lost the election, that he should refuse to concede and just throw the entire U.S. political system into turmoil. This is pretty mind-boggling stuff. This is not what Julian Assange was arrested for. And I'm not even sure if it's illegal. But it is pretty mind-boggling that WikiLeaks was working hand in glove with the Trump administration to help Donald Trump become president. How does that help journalism? The guy who's president now calls journalists enemies of the people? I don't get it, but in any case. Trump is saying, hey, let's drop the asylum seekers in the sanctuary cities, right? Yeah, let's just dump them in the sanctuary cities. Brilliant idea. Apparently, you know, what this tells me is that, and this apparently was a scheme that Stephen Miller and Donald Trump came up with. What this tells me is that Trump may actually believe his own lies, which makes sense. I mean, the easiest way to keep repeating something is to believe it's true. So you convince yourself of the truth of your own lies, is apparently what Trump is doing. He actually believes that among the asylum seekers, there are murderers and rapists and killers and gang members and ISIS members and all these other things that he has said in the past. I mean, the simple reality is that the more immigrants there are in a community, the lower the crime rate is. I mean, we just know that. It's a statistical reality. So if he were to dump a lot of asylum seekers into San Francisco, which was his suggestion, where Nancy Pelosi, you know, the district that Nancy Pelosi represents in Congress, the crime rate would go down. But apparently nobody told Trump and Stephen Miller that. Or when they did tell them, they decided, oh, well, not such a good idea. I guess we better not do that. Meanwhile, in Texas, this Texas state legislature is debating a law right now that would make the penalty for getting an abortion death by lethal execution in the state of Texas. This all goes back to a law that was passed that George W. Bush promoted. It was called the Unborn Victims of Violence Act. And when that law was passed, which said that if you shoot and kill a pregnant woman, you're guilty of 2 murders, not 1. And when that law was passed, regardless of how pregnant she is, she could be a week pregnant, you're guilty of 2 murders. When that law was passed, there were a lot of people who said, hey, wait a minute, this is ultimately going to lead to women being prosecuted for homicide if they get an abortion. And all the anti-abortion people said, oh, you're just hysterical. Well, that's exactly the argument that they're making in Texas. This is Tony Tinderholt, Republican from Arlington, Texas, according to Fox 4 News. Quote, I think it's important to remember that if a drunk driver kills a pregnant woman, they get charged twice. If you murder a pregnant woman, you get charged twice. What I'm doing is equalizing the law. So if a woman goes to get an abortion who lives in Texas, presumably, even if she lives even if she goes to another state to get an abortion, Texas wants to not only charge her with murder, but put her to death. So those are a few of the stories in the news. I mean, it's just a very, very small beginning. Frankly, there's a whole lot going on. But starting points for me. And so, let's pick up your calls and see what you have to say about these things. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's on your mind?
Hey, Professor, I don't know if I should sing Happy Days Are Here Again or The Party Is Over, because Mr. Trump, he's going down, my friend, with respect to his taxes. I saw that same program last night. The law is very, very clear. Unless this guy is just going to be adamantly defiant of American law, he's busted straight up.
Yeah, well, the problem is that the enforcer of American law, the ultimate enforcer of American law right now is Bill Barr. And Bill Barr has signaled to the world that he's just Mr. Trump's toady, period, full stop.
Professor, do you think Steve Mnuchin, I hope I'm saying his name correctly, is going to risk going to jail for this fool?
Well, that's the question, and we'll probably know the answer to that sometime next week. But it's in order to enforce the law, Bill Barr would have to initiate that process, I believe.
No, Professor, Bill Barr, the Attorney General. He don't have. Oh, I know what you're saying. You're talking about enforcement. What I was about to say.
Yeah, all the federal attorneys work for him.
To do with this.
Every single federal attorney in the United States works for Bill Barr. All the the 100 ones in all the various states, plus the federal law enforcement like the FBI. I mean, they literally all report to Bill Barr, and so I think the fix is in, at least until after the election, and then after the election, if Trump refuses to concede, as WikiLeaks had recommended to him back on election day of 2016, if he refused to concede. It's going to be a real mess. I mean, this is the kind of stuff.
All the Democrats running for president should have their picket signs, be in front of the White House saying, I paid my taxes, I've showed my taxes, show yours. Forget the Mueller report, stick on the tax issue, because that's what put Al Capone in jail. That's what's going to take him out the White House.
Well, it may well be. It may well be. But Morris, I'm getting very, very wary of praying for silver bullets. I think there's already enough out there to get him out of the White House. I mean, obviously it's criminal collusion, on the Stormy Daniels thing, to violate campaign finance laws and steal an election. Morris, thanks for the call. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 16 minutes past the hour. It's Anything Goes Friday. Back with your calls right after this. And welcome back. Robbie in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Robbie, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom.
Robbie, your phone is breaking up. You want to try it again?
Yeah. Hold on 1 second. Let me actually get out of this building.
Okay,
really
Robbie,
quick.
I'm going to put you on hold, and you can talk to Shira. Greg in Tatum, Washington. Hey, Greg, what's up?
Yeah, hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I wanted to tell some good news. The company called Nikola Motors is going to have a great expo in Scottsdale, Arizona, at a place called Westworld this Wednesday, the 17th of April. And they're going to be giving free rides in their hydrogen-powered semi-trucks and ATVs. There's going to be food and drink for everybody. And it's from 1 to 6 p.m. this Wednesday, the 17th. Nikola Motors has over $13 billion in pre-orders.
Whoa!
Go to the website to check it out. It's going to be cool. This is hydrogen power coming to life right now.
That's amazing. Now, Nikola Tesla was, kind of the inventor of alternating current and all that kind of thing. And he was, he's the guy that Tesla is obviously named after. Is Nikola Motors also named after him, only his first name instead of his last?
I think so. I just look up hydrogen news. This is a non-publicly traded company.
All right.
It's big, and I'm hoping it's going to be on all the news stations.
Very interesting. So where again is this unveiling going to be?
It's in Scottsdale, Arizona, at a place called Westworld.
Westworld in Scottsdale. Okay. Fascinating.
Yeah, and they're going to have live streaming of it on the web. So if you go to Nikola Motors on Wednesday evening or Wednesday afternoon from 1 to 6, then you can go see live streaming of their hydrogen-powered semi-trucks and ATVs. And if you're close enough to go there, which I'm not, then you can get free rides.
Great. Greg, thanks a lot for the information. That's fascinating. Renee in St. Louis. Hey, Renee, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I am well. What's on your mind? Please get your mouth closer to your microphone, Renee.
Okay, hold on for a second. Let me get I got my headset off. Okay, so here.
Okay, well, that's all right, Renee. What's on your mind? We only have a minute.
Okay, impeachment. Once impeachment is completed with any president, male or female, okay, do we still as a nation have to give them retirement? Because my understanding is when a president retires, we still take care of that person.
Well, we provide them with
some form of security and.
Yeah, they have a pension. They have a pension, which is not huge, and they have ongoing Secret Service protection. And I'm sure that there's a whole bunch of other perks.
Do you still get a pension?
I don't know, Renee. That's a really good question. I mean, it's never happened before.
The rest of us, when we get fired, we lose our pensions, don't we?
Well, it depends on the company that you're fired from and how strong the union is, but. Probably. I think in most cases, yeah.
Well, he's already stolen enough money.
Yeah.
He's already stolen enough money, so he should be financially sound.
Yeah, look at all the money he stole from his daddy's estate.
Okay, so he should be okay. He won't starve. I'm not saying that the man should starve.
Yeah, no, we don't.
We should not continue to pay him.
Yeah, we don't want anybody starving in America. Although I wouldn't mind if he was living in a cardboard box on Skid Row in New York City and eating at a shelter. But
I just think we should. I just think we shouldn't have to pay him anymore.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you, Renee. Thank you for the call. Thanks for watching us on YouTube. We'll be back. It's coming up on. 21 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just lost my my links to all my calls here, so we've got to. I thought that we're always resetting our phones every day. Oh, we did today? Okay, well, we're going to have to reset them again, I guess, because it looks like our phones have crashed. So let me just share some news stories here with you as we head toward the break at the bottom of the hour. And then if you were on hold or if you were calling, just give us a call back in about 10 minutes. We'll have this all fixed up and ready to go. I mentioned the death sentence for abortion. And Trump trying to dump asylum seekers in San Francisco. Let me just add on to that. Bill Barr, the Attorney General, is going a whole big step beyond this. The Attorney General Bill Barr is making drastic changes to the immigration courts, writes Mark Sumner over at Daily Kos, setting up a system in which a handful of appellate court immigration judges can issue sweeping rulings that limit the actions of every other judge in the system. And Barr is on a hiring spree to make sure that the immigration courts are packed with the people necessary to see that Donald Trump's will is imposed. They're making it possible for appellate judges to rule against asylum seekers en masse without ever giving them individual hearings. Earlier this month, Trump declared to Congress that Congress has to get rid of the whole asylum system because it doesn't work. This is what he's doing. He's packing the court, the immigration courts, which are a separate part of our judiciary. He's packing them with these crazed judges. Some of his judges are denying 98% of asylum seekers. And in some cases, they want to do it en masse. So they're not even examining individual cases, whereas the typical rate of denial is a little less than 20%. There are 800,000 families currently waiting in hopes of being admitted to the United States. And, the system wasn't broken until Donald Trump broke it. And this is just incredible. I mean, what's going on? It's just absolutely incredible. And it is so wrong. I don't know how to describe it beyond that. It's just wholly and morally wrong. Anyhow, I see our call screen system is back up again. Dallas and Lacey, Washington. Hey, Dallas, what's on your mind today?
I just wanted to talk to you about, I heard recently about the democratic socialism that's been going around the media, and nobody really talks about the Republican socialism that's been going on with the oil and gas industry.
Yeah, $300 billion a year subsidy.
Yeah, and then the farming and it just, nobody's putting any real money into renewable energies like hydrogen and optimizing solar cells and things like that. And then you've got this, I heard about it on the news yesterday, and it's an abbreviation, ITCC or something like that, where these countries are signing on to these contracts. And it says basically that, if the country decides to go another way and harm a corporation, then the corporation can sue that country for future losses.
Oh, yeah, that's in most of the trade deals.
Yeah, that's just, people really need to wake up about that and get out of that program, because if we're going to move to renewable energy, the
oil industry could sue for a fortune. That's part of NAFTA. That's part of the new NAFTA. That's part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, although we didn't join that. It's part of our deal with South Korea. It's a standard part of most of the trade deals that corporations can sue. And it's not even in a real court. They get to sue in a court where the judges have been appointed by their fellow corporations.
Yeah, and it just looks like outrageous corruption to me.
Oh, it is. It really is. And the Republicans have created this frame that socialism is when you help people, but it's not socialism when you help a corporation. That's government support of business and industry, right? That's helping the job creators create more jobs. And somehow the American public and the American media, frankly, have bought this narrative, which is just pretty mind-boggling, really, when you think about it, Dallas.
It is mind-boggling, and then, on top of that, they talk about what's the biggest risk to our national security, and right now, blatantly to me, it's Donald Trump and the Republican Party.
Yeah, amen. Very, very well said, Dallas. Thanks for the call, Robbie in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Robbie, what's up?
Hey, Tom, can you hear me this time?
Yeah, go for it.
Great. I just wanted to talk about Julian Assange. It's kind of interesting. I was going to ask you a question. We talked about this a while ago, but the Russian election interference through WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, how exactly did they interfere with the election through WikiLeaks? And I'll have a follow-up question when you answer.
I'm not sure.
So here's the narrative that we're told, is that WikiLeaks damaged Hillary Clinton's campaign by having the DNC hacked by Russians, who then published it through there, right?
I'm not sure that that's the narrative. I think the narrative that is laid out in the Mueller indictment of the 12 or 13 Russian intelligence officers is that they did the hacking. They got the information. They went to WikiLeaks and said, here you go. WikiLeaks was already predisposed to dislike Hillary, and so they decided to use that.
Hey, Tom.
Yeah.
Tom.
Yeah.
Hold on. At what point did Julian Assange do anything but tell the truth? Do you think he was telling the truth on a corrupt politician, or do you think he was trying to get Trump elected?
That's a good question. I think he was trying to get Trump elected. If you look at his correspondence with Don Jr., which I read earlier in the program, in fact, he explicitly was trying to get Trump elected. Robbie, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Well, once again, a media organization trying to get a president elected. There's nothing criminal about that, and that's not what Julian Assange was arrested for. Our book today is Confessions of a Rogue Nuclear Regulator by Gregory B. Jackso, former chairman of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I'm going to start with the last paragraph of Chapter 1, and then I'll start reading Chapter 2. In hindsight, the Fukushima incident revealed what has long been the sad truth about nuclear safety. The nuclear power industry has developed too much control over the NRC and Congress. In the aftermath of the accident, I found myself moving from my role as a scientist impressed by nuclear power to a fierce nuclear safety advocate. I now believe that nuclear power is more hazardous than it's worth. Because the industry relies too much on controlling its own regulation, the continued use of nuclear power will lead to catastrophe in this country or somewhere else in the world. This is a truth we must all confront. Chapter 2. The Fukushima accident in Japan was not the first accident to belie the promise of nuclear power. In its early years, the commercial nuclear industry had only a limited understanding of the operation, science, and engineering of actual power plants. This ignorance led to the first major nuclear power plant accident just outside Harrisburg, the state capital of Pennsylvania, in 1979. 3 Mile Island prompted a flurry of reforms and a pile of promises that the public would be protected from future nuclear calamities. Through the mid-1980s, it appeared these promises were being kept. Construction on new plants slowly resumed without major accidents. Then suddenly, strange radiation measurements were detected in Sweden. Governments in Europe and throughout the world soon learned that a disaster had occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the Soviet Union. Like a developing photograph in a bath of chemicals, the reality of nuclear power was starting to come clear. One nuclear accident was an oversight, a mistake, an aberration. 2 nuclear accidents hinted at a serious problem with the technology. A third would cement the conclusion that nuclear power plants were simply going to have accidents on a relatively consistent schedule. After 3 Mile Island, after Chernobyl, the third accident nearly occurred in 2002 at the troubled Davis-Besse nuclear power plant in Ohio. The problem is that with each new accident, all the people in charge of nuclear safety seemed to revert to the belief that this one would be the last one. As chairman of the NRC, I battled nearly every day against this instinct to believe that the worst was over. You can prepare for the next accident only if you get all the players to admit that a next one is coming, even if and when are impossible to predict. Before Fukushima, too many people I encountered simply did not believe the next one would ever come. Their view is not surprising. Accidents are rare, and Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island had happened decades earlier. Yet I continue to believe I could challenge this complacency. I seized one opportunity just after I became chairman. 4 days before President Obama tapped me to lead the commission, I spoke at a conference organized by the North American Young Generation in Nuclear, an industry group of professionals entering the field as nuclear operators, designers of reactors, or academic experts in nuclear technology. As I looked out at the crowd, it dawned on me that many of these people had never lived through a nuclear power accident. Even if I had been only 9 years old when 3 Mile Island occurred, when Chernobyl happened, I was a teenager, more worried about surviving my freshman year of high school than about nuclear disaster. The people I was speaking to were even younger. I wondered how they had experienced these seminal events. Being a scientist, I decided to conduct an experiment. I asked everyone in the audience to stand if they were born after 1979, the year of 3 Mile Island. Nearly everyone stood. After they sat down, I asked them to stand if they were born after 1986, the date of the Chernobyl accident. Once again, nearly everyone stood. These industry-defining accidents have become dry case studies taught in college classes. The next generation of American nuclear power professionals has never experienced the confusion of a nuclear accident as it is happening. And so it's essential that we remember and teach the lessons of 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl. For reviewing these accidents shows common themes of missed opportunity, human failings, and technological overconfidence. No amount of forgetting can change these simple facts. The March 1979 accident at the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania seems almost like something out of a science fiction horror film. The cover of Time magazine captured the national mood of chaos, confusion, and fear. The emergency red phrase "nuclear nightmare" slashed across the dark black cooling towers of the plant. There was no live-streamed video, as there would be after the Fukushima accident, but the public could imagine the scene inside the reactor. Just 12 days before the accident, The China Syndrome, a feature film starring Jane Fonda and Michael Douglas as reporters who uncover a major incident in a nuclear plant, had been released. Perhaps the hundreds of journalists gathered outside Harrisburg believed they too would land such a story. It started on March 28th at around 4 a.m. when a water pump stopped working. The failed pump affected the steam generators, large cylinders filled with many tiny metal tubes that help turn hot water from the nuclear engine into steam so that the turbines can generate electricity. When the flow of water was cut off, this massive heat exchange stopped working, creating the conditions for a serious accident. The reactor engine was immediately turned off. But so long as the reactor fuel remained hot, which it would for quite some time, its natural radioactive decay would continue, producing enough heat, called decay heat, to melt through the metal containers enclosing the reactor fuel. The same problem would later affect Fukushima. And then he goes through the whole process there. Confessions of a Rogue Nuclear Regulator by Gregory B. Jackso.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Let me just make this very clear based on, the last conversation that I had with the caller from Portland. If there was any evidence that the U.S. charges against Julian Assange were charges having to do with legitimate journalistic activity, I would be raising holy hell in defense of Julian Assange. If it even looked to me like this was the beginning of going down that road, I mean, I'm in the media business. I don't want the government, controlling or regulating the media, period. And I have reported stories on this program that were told to me in confidence by other people, certainly, with the goal that they would be reported. I don't frankly know if any of them violated, secrecy laws and things like that. But certainly, the New York Times and the Washington Post have regularly published things that were stolen, that were leaked. That's routine journalism. And that's what WikiLeaks was doing initially. But to have the head of essentially the publisher, it would be the equivalent of the publisher of the New York Times, reaching out to a source and saying, let me help you crack a password. That's a different thing than thank you for the information. Now, there are some people who are suggesting that Assange is being, basically busted for corresponding with Chelsea Manning. There's nothing wrong with that. It is absolutely normal for reporters and sources to talk, and for reporters to even encourage sources. People are saying, well, Julian Assange said, in my opinion, the curious eye is never dry, or whatever the phrase was, In other words, there's probably more information that you can get for me. That's not illegal, and that, again, is not what he's being charged with. And it concerns me when I see news stories that report that as if it was bad, because it's not. Now, with regard to Julian Assange conspiring with Don Jr. to maximize the impact on behalf of Donald Trump in the elections, the WikiLeaks, and presumably it's Julian Assange. This is a WikiLeaks account corresponding with Don Jr. It's not specifically Julian Assange. We just don't know. But apropos of that, that is not illegal. That's not a crime. What it does tell us is that, WikiLeaks was very interested in the outcome of the election and was aggressively and actively working with Don Jr. and presumably others in the Trump campaign to damage Hillary Clinton. And they were quite successful in that, by the way. I mean, just threw the DNC into chaos by releasing those stories the first day of the Democratic National Convention, releasing Hillary's emails. The day that Access Hollywood comes out, releasing John Podesta's emails, changing the narrative of the news cycle. These are things that could have been decisive in the election, but they're not illegal. And, even reaching out to Don Jr. and saying, hey, we're going to dump this information. In my mind, that's not illegal. In fact, I would not be surprised if news outlets, particularly highly partisan news outlets, like Fox News, for example, or maybe even MSNBC, regularly correspond with or try to time stories or whatever to help the politicians that they like. That's not illegal. And if we criminalize that, we are walking into some really, really dangerous territory. We can be pissed off that WikiLeaks was corresponding with Don Jr., telling him when these dumps were coming, helping him out, advising him specifically on what to tweet and how to get the word out. We can be pissed off about that, but you don't put people in jail for that, to the best of my knowledge. which is why this information has been out. I mean, the story that I read to you from Julia Yaffe was from 2017. It was from 2 years ago. And it's why Don Jr. isn't in jail. It's not against the law. It's ugly. It's terrible, ugly politics, but it's not against the law. So let's just be really clear about what's going on here. And as long as, and by the way, once there's this doctrine of, I'm forgetting the word, purity is the word that comes to mind, and that's not the word. But it's this doctrine that says that basically, and I think where this comes from is that there's a bunch of countries in the world that don't have the death penalty. In fact, I think there's only like 10 or 12 countries now that still have the death penalty. You know, us and North Korea and Saudi Arabia. There's just a few. And so there's a lot of countries that if we've got a warrant for the arrest of somebody who has committed murder, they will not send that person back to the United States if that person will face the death penalty, even if they have an extradition treaty with the United States. So what this doctrine, this treaty doctrine says is, whatever you charge somebody with, when you request extradition, when you request us to arrest them and send them to your country, whatever you charge them with, you may not add to those charges unless they commit further crimes when they get to your country. So if Julian Assange came to the United States and got out on bail and broke into a bank or something, then, you know, he could be charged with bank robbery. But unless they commit another crime after they've, you know, arrived in the new country to which they were extradited, you cannot add charges. So, you know, barring any additional charges being put against Julian Assange before he's brought to the United States, and we've seen no indication that there's more charges coming, he's going to be charged with trying to hack a password or helping to hack a password. He's not going to be charged with encouraging a source, and he shouldn't be. That's a normal part of journalism. He's not going to be charged with colluding with the Trump campaign, as disgusting as that may be. That's a normal part, or at least that's not illegal. I wouldn't say it's a normal part of journalism, but it's not uncommon. I mean, going back to the founding of the Republic, there were newspapers that supported John Adams, and there were newspapers that supported Thomas Jefferson in 1800. And yes, they were talking to John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. They're publishers. We've got the correspondence. So that's not illegal. It's pretty gross, but it's not illegal. So anyhow, I just want to be really clear about all that stuff. Wes in Willits, California. Hey, Wes, what's on your mind?
Hey, I wanted to talk about this new DCCC rule that could have disastrous consequences for 2020 if it's not overturned. And this is not getting the attention it should. And I think next time you have Tom Perez on the show, you ought to ask him why he's allowing this blatant election rigging.
Oh, you're talking about the party will not support, will not provide funds to a candidate who's challenging an incumbent. The DCCC and the DNC are two very different organizations. You realize that, Wes?
Well, I thought that DCCC was just their financial arm.
No. The DCCC is the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. It is always chaired by a member of the House of Representatives. It's because there's the DSCC, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee as well. So there's a group for the Senate that's chaired by a senator that works on getting senators elected. There's a group for the House that's chaired by a member of the House that works on getting House members elected. And then there's the DNC that is responsible for the Democratic Party nationally. And I don't believe that the DNC has the ability to basically stop the behavior of the DCCC or the DSCC unless what they're doing is illegal. And I had thought, Wes, that was a proposed rule that the DCCC had walked back. Are you sure that it has not been undone?
They're definitely not walking it back. Sherry Bustos went on Morning Joe a couple weeks and says she's not backing down. This is here to stay. And if they don't challenge this, though, I'm afraid Democrats are going to get wiped out in 2020, though. This is blatant election rigging against progressives, and they got to do something about it. There's got to be a lawsuit. They should be suing the pants off the DCCC for this blatant election rigging like this.
Well, I'm guessing that if there is anything illegal about this, or even, you know, frankly inappropriate, that that'll happen. That the you know, the Democratic challengers. This, by the way, this is why what you're pointing out is so important, Wes. Ben McAdams is a Democrat. He represents a district in Utah. And he's a member of, along with 25 others, or 26 others, he's a member of the Blue Dog Coalition. And he is warning that the Green New Deal would increase the budget deficit, and he wants a constitutional amendment so that there is no deficit, and which is just stupid, by the way. And basically, you know, he and the members of the Blue Dog Coalition are doing the work of the fossil fuel industry. And so, you know, if somebody, a progressive, wants to challenge him, in my opinion, that would be a good thing. Now, you know, I realize there are people who would argue that, no, you know, Utah is solidly red, and that seat will go to a Republican if it's progressive. I disagree. I look at what, you know, Bernie carrying West Virginia, Bernie carrying Michigan, Bernie carrying the very, very Republican parts of this country. The progressive agenda, when it's laid out and clearly explained, actually is appealing to many Republicans and most centrists as well as Democrats. But nonetheless, that would be the effect. Wes, thank you for the call. It is an issue that is of some importance, and we should find out what's going on. Charles in Chicago. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
I'm great. What's up?
I'd like to consider the viewpoint that the world, we've got to solve our problems. The world is spinning out of control. Long time ago, Buckminster Fuller talked about spaceship Earth. We have to look towards planetary sustainability. Our governments worldwide do not seem interested in planetary sustainability. So we have to find ways of massing together and superseding the old order, which seems basically involved in self-preservation. What do you think of these kinds of ideas?
Yeah, no, what you're talking about is like the Green New Deal. It's you know, let's at least the U.S. version of it. I mean, other countries are doing it. Norway has said that after 2020, you can no longer buy. I think maybe it's 2024. You can no longer buy gasoline-powered engines. Last year, 60% of all the cars sold in Norway were 100% electric vehicles. Now, the market is changing. Louise and I, last year, we had to buy a new car. I mean, we literally had to. We got a grandson, and we were driving a smart car, which only has 2 seats in it. And so we needed a 4-seat car. And so we bought a Toyota plug-in hybrid. And the plug-in is good for about 30 miles. You know, I haven't driven on anything except electricity in a month and a half. The only time I use anything, you know, the only time I use gasoline is if we're going to drive over to the seacoast or something. And as a consequence of that, we've driven about 5,000 miles since we bought the car, and I'm averaging 137 miles per gallon when I use gasoline. I mean, it's mind-boggling what technology has brought us, and that still has a gasoline engine. You know, I didn't want to pay the big bucks for a Tesla. I mean, this is just a Prius.
Exactly. Yes, just let me make the point quickly that there are so many ways people need to be educated, become educated on what is possible. There are so many ways to do things to get energy cleanly, sustainably, and world sustainably for us all. We could turn this world into a paradise in a matter of years if we so desire.
Absolutely. In California, for example, they just mandated that every new house built in California has to be solar, right? I mean, this is not literally every state in the United States is at a latitude pretty much south of Germany. I think there might be, you know, the very northern part of Washington State and Maine might be north of Germany. But, you know, and Germany, the cloudiest country in Europe, produced 100% of their power from renewables last year.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
At least for a couple of days. You know, but still, it's possible. Yes, he's absolutely right. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Raphael in Abilene, Texas, watching us on Free Speech via Roku. Hey, Raphael, what's up?
Hey, Tom, thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome.
I'm a little nervous, so hang on. I'm just wondering if you have noticed that the president and all these Republicans, they never talk about illegal hiring. So... well,
that's because the president is one of the illegal hirers. I mean, they've already, you know, the Trump company has already kicked about 30 illegal immigrants, undocumented workers out of their company. Some of them who have been there, Bedminster in particular, in New Jersey at the Trump Hotel, been there over 20 years.
Yeah, they never mention the illegal hiring, and they never if they are so sure that the Democrats and these sanctuary cities are the ones that hire them, they would say, well, today we sanctioned so many companies, and but see, they don't say that.
Yeah.
Because they are the ones that are doing the hiring. 9 out of 10 people, even in the state of Texas, as red as it is, probably they vote Republican. They do the hiring, they vote Republican. So that's something that people need to know, that they are the ones that doing the complaining and doing the hiring, and that's the reason why they're here.
Right. I'm with you, Raphael, and this is really a labor market issue. It's not a they and us issue. This is simple economics, and it really needs to be treated as such. Raphael, thanks for the call. Paul in Lucerne, California. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Remember how the Republicans used to have debt clocks? They're all gone now.
Well, they're not all gone. The Peterson Institute is still running one in New York City.
Okay, well, on their congressional websites, they are. The Democrats need to do the same thing. We need to have a corporate welfare website, how much money we spend on corporate welfare, and we need to let the American people know how much money we spend to offshore jobs.
Right.
And add those two figures together. And then when they say, how much is the Green New Deal going to cost? You say, well, this, but this is how much money we pay for corporate welfare. This is how much money we pay to take our jobs overseas. So if we stopped ending that, that's a pretty good down payment on the Green New Deal and on Medicare for All now, isn't it?
Right, and once we've defined what that amount is, let's say that our corporate welfare in the United States is $1 trillion a year, then you could say, well, the Green New Deal is going to cost, and you call it a corporate unit, like the old Friedman unit, which was 6 months because Tom Friedman kept saying the war in Iraq will be over in 6 months, and so everybody started talking about Friedman units as a shorthand for 6 months. So you could use the corporate unit as short for $1 trillion a year, and so you could say, yeah, the Green New Deal will cost a half a corporate unit, or our welfare programs in the United States cost 1/100th of a corporate unit, or things like that. It needs to be wordsmithed a little fancier, in a little more sophisticated way.
We need to change the name to the Green New Jobs Deal, because that's what the Green Deal will do. We need to throw jobs in there because it's all about messaging.
The Green Jobs New Deal. You don't want to separate the two words new and deal, but you could call it the Green Jobs New Deal. Yeah, spot on, Paul. Absolutely. Paul, thanks a lot for the call. Although the Green New Deal actually goes beyond jobs, but still, selling it with jobs, Paul's absolutely right, is the way to do it. We'll be right back with more of your calls. It's about 9 minutes before the hour. Stick around. We'll be right back at the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back to Talk Media for the rest of us. Charles in Vancouver, Washington. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Hey, Tom, good morning and happy Friday to you, sir.
Thank you. Back at you.
Okay, thank you. More and more I realize that 99% of us, maybe a little less, are not knowledgeable about the history of this country, the last 100 years, the labor movement, the profiteering and the penal system, et cetera, et cetera. I just finished The Death of the Liberal Class by Chris Hedges. I'm halfway through The Wages of Rebellion, and I understand and have heard you through the years and know what an outstanding scholar of history that you are. And I am amazed that people have no knowledge of history, have little memory of recent history.
Yep.
And I'm reminded of Marshall McLuhan's, book, The Medium is the Message. I remember some time ago you were talking about you and your wife, Louise, traveling across the heartland. The only thing you heard was Rush Limbaugh on AM.
Yeah, and Sean Hannity.
Yes, the medium has always been the message.
Yep.
And right now, as somebody who used to work in the news back in the Portland market when the news was the news, I am just amazed that there's no accountability, and the degree of hypocrisy is just amazing, Tom. So when I go to the library on a Saturday, the kids there aren't reading books; they're playing video games. There's, we need to be an informed public. We need to be informed citizens.
I agree, and this is one of the problems. I'm into the 4th book right now. I'm writing a book on monopoly, and I just finished a book on voting. The book on the Supreme Court will be out this fall. The book on guns will be out in the summer. I'm writing 2 books a year now for BK, and so I'm working on this 4th book over the last year and a half. And in the research for each one of these books, I've spent a fair amount of time on the internet. And the thing that shocks me, Charles, is how hard it is to find information that predates basically 1995, unless it's been put there by partisan actors, by people who specifically want it there. Particularly things like, if you want to look up something like, the history of the New Deal or the history of tariffs in the United States. You'll find all kinds of stuff about that written by right-wing sites that are there to trash Franklin Roosevelt or to suggest that tariffs somehow caused the Great Depression instead of Republican policies in the 1920s. They're literally rewriting history. But the actual contemporary histories, about the only source that I've been able to find that is at all consistent are the archives of the New York Times, which I find myself relying heavily on, unfortunately. And it's really unfortunate that there's like this giant memory hole of everything that preceded the advent of the internet.
Yes, sir. I want you to know that I'm doing everything I can to promote free speech TV, yourself, and somebody like Amy Goodman. I mean, I don't think people have the attention span of more than 30 seconds or a minute for a soundbite, much less to listen to an hour of real, in-depth, unadulterated news. So
it's unfortunate, and thank you, Charles. Thank you for that. And I would add, Amy Goodman, I think, is the Walter Cronkite of this era. She is the best journalist working in the United States, and she does amazing work. Charles, thank you for the call. I got to move along here. Just have a minute to the break. Heather in Salem, Mass. Hey, Heather, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I guess I just wanted to make a couple of comments on this whole ridiculous Texas pro-life murder bill that's coming up.
Right.
I think there's just no responsibility held to any of these penises that happen to just irresponsibly impregnate these women against their wishes.
Right. So maybe a complementary piece of legislation should be introduced that if a woman gets the death penalty, so does the father of the fetus.
Yeah. Or we can get a new product going for mini guillotines or something.
Oh, to chop the penis off?
Yeah. I mean, it's so absurd to kill somebody that's, when you're trying to save lives, supposedly. Yeah. Or we can also introduce, mandatory vasectomies for boys.
Yeah.
It's just a ridiculous, I'm responding to the ridiculous nature of this with these ideas.
Excuse me. Well, back, and it's not really so ridiculous when you think about it. The Catholic Church's argument against abortion is also their argument against birth control. And that is that at the moment that mom and dad decide that they're going to have sex, that's when the baby's conceived. And therefore, birth control is wrong because you're preventing God's will. You're preventing that conception from happening. And that's also the basis for the religious injunctions against men masturbating. So, if they're going to monitor women's periods to determine whether or not they're pregnant so that they can, and like Mike Pence actually tried to do when he was governor of Indiana, have women report their periods, maybe men should be forced to report every time they masturbate. It's bizarre, Heather. It's truly bizarre. Thank you for calling and pointing that out. We'll be back. And thank you for watching us on Facebook Live.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Headquarters.
We say fight back!
You know, we put together the coolest little newsletter every single day, or every single weekday, every day that we do our show. And Sue Nethercutt is the editor of it, and she does such a brilliant job with this thing. It's absolutely free, by the way. It's, you know, all you have to do is go over to thomhartmann.com and just sign up for it. Sign up for the free newsletter. And we don't sell the list or share it or any of that kind of stuff. So, you know, it's just coming to you, and that's it. And every day, as we're doing the show, Sue is listening to the show, and she is finding the websites for all the articles and all the stories and all the topics, broadly speaking, that I'm talking about on radio and on TV. And then she puts the links in there. We call it Sue's Daily Stack, and it's literally a link to every article that I've referenced and every broad topic that I've talked about. I think you'll find it really a valuable asset, particularly to help you win the water cooler wars. So be sure to check it out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. It's free. It's our newsletter. Thanks a lot. Our book today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is A Woman of No Importance, The Untold Story of the American Spy Who Helped Win World War II by Sonia Purnell. This is from the prologue. France was falling. Burned-out cars, once strapped high with treasured possessions, were nosed crazily into ditches. Their beloved cargoes of dolls, clocks, and mirrors lay smashed around them and along mile upon mile of unfriendly road. Their owners, young and old, sprawled across the hot dust and were groaning or already silent. Yet the hordes just kept streaming past them, a never-ending line of hunger and exhaustion, too fearful to stop for days on end. 10 million women, children, and old men were on the move, all fleeing Hitler's ranks, pouring across the border from the east and the north. Entire cities had uprooted themselves in a futile bid to escape the Nazi blitzkrieg that threatened to engulf them. The fevered talk was of German soldiers stripped to the waist in jubilation at the ease of their conquest. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of the dead. The babies had no milk, and the aged fell where they stood. The hordes drawing overladen old farm carts sagged and snarled in their sweat-drenched agony. The French heat wave of May 1940 was witness to this, the largest refugee exodus of all time. Day after day, a solitary moving vehicle weaved its way through the crowd with a striking young woman at the wheel. Private Virginia Hall often ran low on fuel and medicines, but still pressed on in her French Army ambulance toward the advancing enemy. She persevered even when the German Stukas came screaming down to drop 110-pound bombs onto the convoys all around her, torching the cars and cratering the roads. Even when fighter planes swept over the treetops to machine gun the ditches where women and children were trying to take cover from the carnage. Even though French soldiers were deserting their units, abandoning their weapons and running away, some in their tanks. Even when her left hip was shot with pain from continually pressing down on the clutch with her prosthetic foot. Now, at the age of 34, her mission marked the turning point after years of cruel rejection. For her own sake, as much as for the casualties she was picking up from the battlefields and ferrying to the hospital, she could not fail again. There were many reasons why she was willingly jeopardizing her life far from home in aid of a foreign country when millions of others were giving up. Perhaps foremost among them was that it had been so long since she had felt so thrillingly alive. Disgusted with the cowardice of the deserters, she could not understand why they would not continue the fight. But then she had little to lose. The French still remembered sacrificing a third of their young menfolk to the Great War, and a nation of widows and orphans were in no mood for more bloodshed. Virginia, though, intended to go on the road, wherever the battle took her. She was prepared to take whatever risks, face down any dangers. Total war against the Third Reich might perversely offer her one last hope of personal peace. Yet even this was as nothing compared with what was to come in a life that drew out into a Homeric tale of adventure, action, and seemingly unfathomable courage. Virginia Hall's service in the France of summer 1940 was merely an apprenticeship for a near-suicide mission against the tyranny of the Nazis and their puppeteers in France. She helped to pioneer a daredevil role in espionage, sabotage, and subversion behind enemy lines in an era when women barely featured in the prism of heroism, when their part in combat was confined to the supportive and the palliative, when they were just expected to look nice and act obedient and let the men do the heavy lifting. when disabled women or men were confined to staying at home and leading often narrow, unsatisfying lives. The fact that a young woman who had lost her leg in tragic circumstances broke through the tightest constrictions and overcame prejudice and even hostility to help the Allies win the Second World War is astonishing. That a female guerrilla leader of her stature remains so little known to this day is incredible. Yet that is perhaps how Virginia would have wanted it. She operated in the shadows, and that was where she was happiest, even to her closest allies in France. She seemed to have no home or family or regiment, merely a burning desire to defeat the Nazis. They knew neither her real name nor her nationality, nor how she had arrived in their midst. Constantly changing in looks and demeanor, surfacing without notice across whole swaths of France, only to disappear again as suddenly, she remained an enigma throughout the war, and in some ways after it, too. Even now, tracing her story has involved 3 solid years of detective work, taking me from the National Archives in London, the Resistance Files in Lyon, and the parachute drop zones in the Haute-Loire, to the judicial dossiers of Paris and even the white marble corridors of CIA headquarters at Langley. My search led me through 9 levels of security clearance into the heart of today's world of American espionage. I have discussed the pressures of operating in enemy territory with a former member of Britain's special services and ex-intelligence officers from both sides of the Atlantic. I've tracked down files that were missing and discovered that others remain mysteriously lost or unaccounted for. I have spent days drawing diagrams matching dozens of code names with scores of her missions, months hunting for remaining extracts of these strange disappeared papers, years digging out forgotten documents and memoirs. The book A Woman of No Importance by Sonia Purnell.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Anything Goes Friday, taking your calls on whatever's on your mind. We've been, I did my rant earlier about, my position on WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. I'll just let that stand. We've been talking also about what Bill Barr is up to, and there's a bunch of stuff in the news, but it's Anything Goes Friday, so let's get back to your calls. Casey in West Palm Beach, Florida. Hey, Casey, what's on your mind?
Tom, how you doing? Long time.
Thank you.
Hey, listen, I've talked to you a bunch of times, and I told you 3 years ago, the Democrats better have a game plan, or they're going to have egg on their face, because the bottom line with WikiLeaks or Julian Assange or whatever you want to call it, okay, is all that they did was expose the fraud with the DNC of the rigging of the primaries is what they did. The Democrats are no squeaky clean, and I'm sick
I'm not
of it.
saying they are,
sick of
Casey.
hearing about Russia. We could have won this election if Hillary Clinton wasn't being a queen bee. If she would have teamed up with Bernie, we would have had a landslide victory, and that is a fact.
I agree. Or if she had, and actually Bernie was out there, he campaigned for her more than anybody other than Tim Kaine. And had she picked an actual progressive instead of Tim Kaine as her vice presidential candidate, I think that, she would have easily won. And, there were a lot of mistakes made by her campaign. I have no problem with WikiLeaks saying, as a media organization, we're not going to report on the information that was given to us that's bad about Russia. We are going to report on the information that was given to us that's bad about the Clintons. We're not going to report on the information that was given to us that's bad about Donald Trump. I get that. That Fox News operates the same way. That's not illegal, and I defend their right to do that. And I defend Julian Assange's right to reach out to a source, in this case, Chelsea Manning, and say, hey, you got anything more for me? There's nothing wrong with any of that stuff, right? That's all perfectly legal and is all done in the world of, quote, journalism. What he's being charged with is helping hack a password into a DOD computer. And that's a separate and different thing. That's my point.
Tom, respectfully, Russia was a small, minute reason why we lost the election. The election was lost by the DNC themselves. Hillary Clinton.
Casey, I'm agreeing with you. I have been saying that ever since Election Day. I went on the air the next day and said, you know, Robbie Mook is the guy who should be drawn and quartered. I mean, he ran one of the worst campaigns of my lifetime. But, you know, that's neither here nor there. If you want to, unless what you're saying is that, well, I'm not sure what you're saying, Casey. What's your point?
The DNC has not learned their lesson. They are still talking about Russia. They have no plan. They've had 2 years to get their act together.
Yeah, no, I agree to an extent. I think that to the extent that other countries are messing in our politics, and it's not just Russia, by the way. Israel's doing it, Saudi Arabia's doing it, China's doing it. To the extent that other countries are messing in our politics, directly with money, indirectly through lobbying, indirectly through media, you know, to the extent that other countries are doing that, that's something that we all should be calling out. We should all be outraged about. And frankly, there should be stronger laws against, number one. But number two, you're absolutely right. The Democratic Party needs to be giving people something to vote for, not trying to campaign on a platform of what to vote against. I'm with you. Russell in Hendersonville, North Carolina. Hey, Russell, what's on your mind today?
Yeah. Hey, Tom, about the whole death penalty for abortion.
Yeah.
It's sort of a tongue-in-cheek thing that I'm talking about here, but what we should do is have a referendum, and everybody in America who's of voting age, you say whether you believe in pro-choice or you're in pro-life. And then once we've got that established, say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to make a law that everybody who believes in pro-life, it's against the law for you to have an abortion. Everybody who's pro-choice, it's up to you. And you could sell it to the Congress and everybody by saying, you know, the conservatives by saying, well, hey, you know, if these godless heathens who believe in, you know, pro-choice don't have children, then there'll be much more of you people who believe that, you know, abortion is a horrible thing. Then have another referendum and see how many of the people switch from, you know, the pro-life side, because they're going, oh my God, you know, I won't have a chance to have an abortion if I really need it for my child or for my wife.
Yeah, it could be put on your driver's license like an organ donor, you know, check.
Right. You know, because you know the hypocrisy there. You know that all of those people would say, wait a second. If I don't get this, then you know, it's not going to work. It's just. It's horrible. And then, you know...
by the way, Russell, if I could just interrupt you for a second. For people who just tuned in, one of the things that we were talking about in the previous hour is that a state legislator in Texas has put forward legislation that would call for the death penalty for women who get abortions. Even if they travel out of state to get abortions, still they get the death penalty. And what he's citing is this law that was passed during the Bush administration. And the law that was passed during the Bush administration, and I don't have the name of it right in front of me. I mentioned it in the last hour. I'm sorry. But that law basically says that, you know, if you kill a woman who is pregnant, you're guilty of 2 murders. And this legislator points out, you know, if you're a drunk driver and you kill a woman who's pregnant, you're guilty of 2 murders. If you're a homicidal maniac and you kill a woman who's pregnant, you're guilty of 2 murders, according to federal law. And when that law was passed back during the Bush administration, and George Bush was pushing that law, a lot of us were saying this law is going to lead directly to the criminalization not only of abortion, but of women seeking abortions. And everybody said, oh, you're just being hysterical. And it turns out that the state legislator who is proposing this law is actually explicitly quoting that federal law as the basis for it. Back to you, Russell.
Well, and then that's the case. Is the pious, you know, holier than thou people who believe that, oh, you know, I should be able to tell you how you can run your life or run your body. It should be against the law for them. If they truly believe in it, fine. It's against the law for you. Everybody else?
Yeah. No, I got it. You already said that. Russell, thank you. Yeah. Excellent points. Let's see here. Marilyn in Sun City, West Arizona. Hey, Marilyn, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm really nervous, but I called last week. It was just before a break, but I do want to just pick up on health care again because I deal with a lot of people in my town. It's a very red state who cite 2 things about Medicare for All. They cite the wait lines in Canada, and they cite that we're taxed to death. And I just want to say when it was brought into Saskatchewan in the 1960s, the free health care or a single payer or whatever, Saskatchewan did they were apprehensive about it. They had a doctor's strike for 3 months. People thought the doctors are going to leave. Nobody's going to work under those conditions, blah, blah, blah. But they got through it. And since then, that government was, they kept that government in place for years afterwards because they never forgot.
Yeah, wasn't that Tommy Douglas was his name?
Yes. Yes.
Kiefer Sutherland's grandfather?
Yes, correct. But the other thing is, when I'm faced with that, and these are people who've never been to Canada for the most part, when they talk about the wait lines, I turn around and say, I worked at the hospital here. I worked at a hospital in Canada, but I also worked at the one here. And I got the job because I was fully trained and just walked in and got it. And I said, I have seen the wait lines here. I have seen the wait lines for hip replacements and shoulder replacements. My husband to get in to see a dermatologist might wait 3 or 4 months. So there are wait lines here. It just depends on who you want to see and when you want to see them. Yep. And as far as being taxed to death and prices being high, it just depends on where you go in Canada, just like it depends down here. If you go to, downtown Seattle or New York or California, some of those places are outrageously expensive to live. But it's not that way across the whole U.S., and it's not that way across Canada.
Yeah. Well said, Marilyn. Marilyn, thank you for sharing your perspective and your story with us. I'm familiar with wait lines in the United States. I think anybody who's old enough to have been through the medical system a few times knows that we can have terrible wait lines here in the United States. And in Canada, it's actually not so bad. Marilyn, thank you so much. It's great to hear from you, and you did a great job. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's Anything Goes Friday. And welcome back. Chris in Salem, Oregon, listening on X-Ray FM. Hey, Chris, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I did want to talk about the New York Times piece and the sanctuary city idea that was bandied about. But real quick, apropos of your comment about not being able to find old sources, I remember you, when you were in the Washington, D.C. At the Heritage Foundation, you would see interns and stuff like in computer labs, and they would just spend like hours and hours editing like wiki sources and like going on
WikiLeaks, Wikipedia, yes.
Yeah, and like you.
And it wasn't Heritage; it was another right-wing think tank. But yeah.
So do you think that could be what's going on? Just your anecdotal example is.
Oh, absolutely.
Possibly?
There is literally hundreds of millions of dollars spent on the right, of corporate dollars and billionaire dollars being spent every year to basically seed right-wing worldviews into topic after topic after topic on the internet. And it's getting worse and worse, by the way. Over the last 5-6 years, I've been writing books for 30 years. And the last 5 or 6, and I've been using the internet. I used to run forums on CompuServe in the 80s. I've been on the internet literally as long as there's been an internet. And it's just breathtaking how much worse it's gotten.
Yeah, and then my other comment, the New York Times came out with an article this morning. There was a leaked memo. I think it was just like a draft memo saying that the DHS or Border Patrol thought about moving migrant caravans to, quote, sanctuary cities where, Democratic politicians are in power. I think that's problematic for a couple of reasons. Like, kind of like it seems to have an apartheid-style bent to it. Like, let's push all the brown people with the liberals. And B, I guess I'm fine with that. I live here in Salem and in Portland, and like bring it on. But by that logic, we should then rescind disaster money for states that deny global warming. We should retract Superfund site monies that let corporations run rampant. We should end all welfare to Bobby Jindal in Louisiana for those that denounce welfare recipients. You see where like this logic goes. I don't know if you heard of the story, though. So
yeah, I did. And in fact, we talked about it in the first hour. And what I thought was interesting was apparently this was a scheme that was cooked up by Donald Trump and Stephen Miller. And and Miller has been seeding stories in the Washington Examiner, this super hard right-wing free newspaper that they pass out in Washington, D.C. that paid for by billionaires, that just presents a right-wing point of view. In fact, one of their editors or writers was on MSNBC this morning as a guest talking about how wonderful Donald Trump is. And I was banging my head on the, I guess, actually I turned the TV off. I was just so sick of it. But what Miller has been doing is planting stories in these right-wing newspapers. And then when the right-wing newspapers run the stories, Miller cuts them out, copies them, or just cuts them out, and hands them to Donald Trump. And then Donald Trump goes bat guano crazy. He goes nuts. And so Trump apparently actually believes that the people seeking asylum are gang members and killers and rapists. He apparently believes that because his suggestion was, why don't we just dump these people in San Francisco and Nancy Pelosi will have a crime wave on her hand. And the actual truth is that the higher the local immigrant population, the lower the crime rate. And I'm guessing somebody came along and pointed that out to Stephen Miller and Donald Trump, and they said, oh, okay, we'll go back to just talking points. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Well, welcome back. Tony in Bowie, Maryland. Hey, Tony, thanks for listening to SiriusXM. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. What I was calling about was the voting system.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should be able to at least get a receipt when you vote. I mean, just like when you go to a teller machine or ATM, they have a record of it. They keep that record probably forever, and it can be proven. So somewhere we should start a national referendum where nationally everybody that votes has to get a receipt.
The only problem with that, Tony, is when you get a receipt from your ATM, you can go home and on your computer pull up your bank account and see that you actually made that deposit or took out that money. Whereas when you vote, if you were given a receipt, you have no idea if that. Say that you're voting on a voting machine that when you vote for Al Gore, it actually records the vote for George Bush, right? Let's say that that's the kind of voting machine it is. Then it would just print a receipt saying you voted for Al Gore, and it would still record the vote for George W. Bush. I think the solution is to, if we must have voting machines, and I don't think we have to. Most of the countries in the world are still using paper. Canada still uses paper. Europe still, all the European countries use paper. Ireland tried our voting machines for 1 year. They were so horrified by the experiment that they sold $27 million worth of voting machines for $7,800. They sold them for scrap metal because they wanted to be sure that nobody would mistakenly think that they were actually good voting machines and buy them. They didn't want another country to buy them. So they required that they be sold as scrap. We're the only country that's using voting machines that are from private for-profit vendors that use proprietary software. But if we must have voting machines, they should be A, owned by the government, and B, the software should be open source so we know what's going on. Back to you, Tony.
Right. So my point was, I mean, not voting machines, but have ATM sort of voting machines based on the ATM concept.
Right.
And the government would own them, and the government would control them.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And that way,
in that case.
And that way,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No. I was going to say in that case I agree with you. Finish your thought, and I'll move along. But I think I think we're on the same page here, Tony.
Well, because I just noticed, with banking, Tom, you put your card in, and goddamn it, in 10 seconds, it's done. They checked you out. You got a receipt. You get your money.
Yeah, and the banking stuff is made by Diebold, and so are the voting machines. So why are the voting machines so insecure, and they're on an old Windows platform, and they're easily hacked, and all this other stuff? And Howard Dean on Tina Brown's show, back when she had a show on CNBC, Howard Dean hacked a Diebold voting tabulator computer in 90 seconds and altered the outcome of an election. Howard Dean on national television did this. And this was Diebold. I mean, why is it that they're, and of course, the president of Diebold famously in 2004, wrote that letter saying that Diebold looks forward to helping deliver Ohio for George W. Bush. And of course, John Kerry lost the election in Ohio. So there's still people scratching their heads over that one. Tony, thank you for the call. Michael in Imperial Beach, California. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hey, Mr. Hartmann, I wanted to talk to you about questions to the Prime Minister. Now, obviously, America was born in British society.
Wait a second. You're talking about Prime Minister's questions, where the Prime Minister has to stand up to members of the Parliament, just basically shouting questions at her, and she has to answer them.
Correct.
Every week,
so, okay. Obviously, America was born from British society. So even if the holier-than-thou British call homelessness rough sleeping, that I can understand. But when the British Parliament is most focused on knife crime as one of their up-in-arms problems, my question is, Tom, what does that say about not all Americans by any means, but that certain fringe who worship their AR-15s and their millions of rounds of savage death?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't get the association between the two, Michael.
Okay, here you got Britain, who birthed us, and their major problem is knife crime. Our major problem are guns.
Right.
So it seems like Britain has gotten their gun problem under control. And they're
long
worried
ago.
About that. Right.
Yeah.
And so what does that say about these fringe of people who work, the Second Amendment, all that stuff? I was just wondering your thoughts.
Well, there are some people who believe, first, I mean, you've got a bunch of different reasons why people want to own guns. Some people own guns for sport. They like to do target shooting or skeet shooting. I actually like both of those things. I do both of those things. You've got some people who want to have guns for self-protection, and some of them, in some cases, it's a legitimate thing. I know talk show hosts who carry guns, and it actually makes a certain amount of sense. If you read my email, you would understand what I'm talking about. On the other hand, there are people who basically fetishize guns. They collect, dozens and dozens of guns. If you want to have a collection, collect stamps, right? And it's like, although, a legitimate collector, particularly antique guns and something like that I could see. But then you've got these people who think that they need to have guns to take down the U.S. government if it ever becomes oppressive. Those people are living in fantasy land. And too often, those people are literally living in fantasy land. That is, they are paranoid, clinically paranoid, mentally ill. And they end up being people like the Las Vegas shooter, who apparently was one of these people. And, that's really, those people should not be allowed to have guns. I mean, it's just really simple. We need to have some common sense gun regulation. And that's where I think, my suggestion of treating guns like cars, registration, license, insurance. Very simple, very straightforward. We'll be back. It's 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Anything Goes Friday. Back with more of your calls right after this. For our book club today, we're reading from a book that's long out of print, The History of World War II, Armed Services Memorial Edition. It's written by Francis Trevelyan Miller and the U.S. military, and with the Board of Historical and Military Authorities by Universal Book and Bible House in 1945. And this is from the chapter, The Phenomenon of Hitler. It starts out, his father was Alois Schicklgruber, the illegitimate child of a peasant girl who bore his mother's name until he was 40. Alois started out as a shoemaker's apprentice. Conscripted into the army, he rose to the rank of sergeant. That was so much above a mere cobbler, he stayed with the army for 15 years. After his discharge, he received a so-called certificate appointment that made him a minor customs official with the Imperial Civil Service. He had worked up to what seemed to him high above the scorned class of common people, the peasants, and the poor little working men. That trait had its influence on his son, Adolf. Alois Schicklgruber married 3 times. His first wife, 14 years older than he, divorced him. While his first marriage was still valid, another girl, Franziska Matzelsberger, bore him a son, Alois. Schicklgruber married her after his divorced wife died. 2 months after their marriage, she bore him a daughter, Angela. 1 year later, his second wife died. 10 months thereafter, he married Clara Polzel, who was his junior by 23 years. He was 47 then and had in the meantime changed his name to obtain a legacy to Hitler. From his third marriage sprang 5 children, of whom 3 died in infancy. The 2 surviving were Adolf and Paula. Adolf Hitler's half-brother, Alois, ran away from home, complaining about cruel treatment by his father. He worked as a waiter in England, married an Irish girl, treated her cruelly, and begot a son, William Patrick Hitler. After Adolf came to power, Alois returned to Germany, leaving wife and son behind, and became a prosperous innkeeper. Adolf's half-sister, Angela, also followed him to Germany from Austria to care for his households in Munich and Berchtesgaden. She was the mother of unhappy Gel Rubal, the girl who is said to have committed suicide after becoming enamored of her uncle Adolf. His sister Paula, considered a queer person, lived a troublesome life in Vienna and became an ardent Nazi. William Patrick Hitler broke away from the Hitler clan and came with his mother to the United States to fight against the world scourge of Nazism. This young man, imbued with the spirit of freedom inherited from his liberty-loving Irish mother, joined the United States Navy. The historians of this volume held confidential talks with Hitler's nephews, some of which can be related here. He placed before us official documents which threw light on the background of Adolf Hitler. He told us about the years when he lived with his uncle at Berchtesgaden, the conduct and habits of the Fuhrer, how in his mountain retreat, the most strongly fortified in the world, Hitler planned and plotted world conquest. The nephew related to us the secrets of the mysterious Rudolf Hess and the Ernst Putzi Hofstadtgegel, who fled to England, the latter being held prisoner in Canada and later coming to the United States. Letters were submitted to document the facts. These are books in themselves, which undoubtedly will be revealed in future years. It is sufficient to state here that young Patrick Hitler fled from Berchtesgaden when he became convinced that his uncle, Adolf, was suffering from delusions of grandeur and a messianic complex which endangered his own nephew's life as well as Germany and the whole world. Having disposed of 1,000 of his intimates, Adolf Hitler's own family was not safe from attack. He would break into his nephew's room in the midnight hours to rant about how he would conquer the world. As a child, he was as difficult as Alois, his father. Father Alois was a tyrannical egoist with a mania for cruelty. Young Adolf liked to rage in rabid oratories, audience or no audience. His father called him daffy and lazy. He wanted his son to become an important personage like himself. But 11-year-old Adolf revolted against going to school and exposing himself to the heavy task of book learning. He hated his teachers, he hated his schoolmates. Faced by the odious realities of life as they were fearfully represented to him by a father with a big stick and an inclination for alcohol, Adolf wanted only to escape. He was 13 at the time of his father's death and 19 when his mother died. Of the 6 years between those two events, little is known about the boy's doings, except that he prevailed upon his mother to take him out of the hated secondary school, and that she encouraged him in his hobby of making drawings until his ego became inflated to the point that he believed himself a genius. He lived on his mother's pension until her death. With his mother and her income gone, the escapist days were over. He had to face life. A misfit, uneducated, arrogant, undeveloped in mind, stubborn and quarrelsome, without any moral concepts. Such was young Adolf Hitler when he entered Vienna in the beginning of 1909. Here his ego was deflated for the first time. He could not even pass his entrance exams to the Academy of Arts. His drawings were considered crude imitations, counterfeits. When a jury at the Academy of Munich refused a painting he submitted for exhibition, he stormed back to inquire who composed the jury. He learned that among them was a Jew who ranked as one of the outstanding masters of German art. At once, he blamed the jury's decision to exclude his work upon this Jew, declaring, "They shall pay for this." Precipitated from vainglory, Hitler woke to find himself an obscure outcast. In his despair, he stooped so low in his own estimation as to take up work as an unskilled laborer. To carry mortar on scaffolding was far beneath his dignity. He had not yet conceived the idea that Providence had chose him to be the leader of the master race. The history of World War II.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
34 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Michael in Princeton, Minnesota. It's Anything Goes Friday. What's up, Michael?
Boy, you got a lot of subjects I could talk about, but I'll stick to the one I called about.
Thank you.
In your first hour, there was a guy that called about hydrogen vehicles. Back about 15 years ago, I went to the state fair here in Minnesota, and there was a hybrid semi-tractor there. So, you know, they've been out for a long time. There was another time when this is way back when I was a whole lot younger, and I worked at a gas station when we pumped the gas and checked the oil and all that, opened up the hood, and here there's a little tank there with a couple of electrodes going to it. And I asked the guy, I said, well, what is that? And he says, well, that's an electrolysis machine to divide up water. You know, and then he was taking the hydrogen, I guess, and putting it into his carburetor.
Mm-hmm.
Another time,
yeah, they used to do that with ether. It's just juicing the combustion.
Yeah. And another time, a guy pulled in a pickup, and he got out and he was going to pump his own gas. So I thought, well, okay, while he's doing that, I'll go check the oil. I opened up the hood. There's no motor.
Huh.
I said, how did you get here? He said the motor in the back. He had about a 7 or 8 horse engine back there with a motor with a hydraulic pump, and he had the servo hooked up to the front of the transmission. And I asked him, I said, well, how does that work? He said, well, I haven't got it perfected yet for high speed, but he says, I can definitely get around town, and I haul things with it. He says, it's got more power than a gas engine.
Huh.
You know, even though the engine was small.
Yeah.
And back years ago, the automotive stores like Warshawski, J.C. Whitney, you know, I don't even know if they're in existence anymore.
Right.
They used to sell a kit for injecting water vapor into your carburation system.
Yeah, you're right.
Because I guess apparently they found out long-haul drivers found out that when the humidity level is higher, they got better mileage or something.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. The problem is that you also get more rust.
Yeah.
You get more corrosion inside your carburetor and inside your fuel system, your injectors and everything else.
Right.
So, you know, that never really, I remember back in the 70s, people, you know, modifying their cars, and I had friends who were into that, you know, and you grew up in a working class neighborhood, and working on your car was like one of the big things to do. And in fact, I did it myself, you know, basically took apart and put back together parts of, anyway, the engine of an old Mustang that I had bought for $100, as I recall, back in the late 60s. But there's lots of ways to do this, but the really exciting stuff that's coming along, and I was talking about this in the last hour, Louise and I we've been driving the smart car since we were in D.C., which is perfect for D.C. because you can park anywhere, but it's a little two-seater. And we need, you know, we moved to Portland. Our 3 kids live here. We've got grandkids. So we wanted to get a car that had a back seat. And so I picked up a Prius hybrid plug-in hybrid. And because we didn't want to, you know, pay the high price for a Tesla or something like that. And it goes 30 miles on a charge. And, you know, whenever we get home, we just plug it in. And I almost never drive more than 30 miles. We're averaging 136, 137 miles per gallon right now. And I haven't driven on gasoline in weeks. I mean, you know, it's just anywhere around town, I'm within 30 miles of where I'm going. And, you know, the Chevy Volt was a 40-mile range. Some of them, you know, the new ones are probably going to have 50, 60-mile ranges. And, of course, electric cars now 200 and 300-mile ranges. It's like, it's here. And then we had a caller earlier who was talking about this company, Nikola Motors outside of Phoenix, that or Scottsdale, I think it was, that is going to be rolling out or has rolled out hydrogen fuel cells operated trucks, competitors for giant diesel 18-wheelers. And he said ATVs. I wonder if he meant RVs, larger vehicles. And yesterday I was walking to work, and I saw a UPS truck that said hybrid vehicle on the side of it. It's like, this stuff is all happening, right? I mean, Norway now, 60% of the cars sold in Norway this last year were electric. Because in 2024, Norway's going to make it, that's it. You can't import any more gasoline-powered engines into our country. And other countries are doing this. China is making more electric cars than the United States does.
Minneapolis is introducing electric buses, and our garbage truck out here is propane.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, all this stuff is happening, and while the Republicans are trying to rescue the fossil fuel industry, which is just pathetic. It's just pathetic. Michael, thank you for sharing that. It's great to hear from you. Jennifer in Chicago. Hey, Jennifer, what's on your mind?
Thanks for educating me. Secondly, the conversation you were having with a previous caller about getting a receipt when you do your vote, I've been thinking about this for a long time. Why can't there be a government-sponsored website where you put in the number from the receipt that you get when you turn it in, and you can go onto that website, put in that receipt number, and it shows you exactly how you voted?
Yeah. If the day ever comes, Jennifer, when we have a really solidly, truly bulletproof internet, then I'm with you. And I'm kind of torn by this because, online banking is a thing, right? People do that.
Right.
And, and it may be that the banking industry is covering up how much fraud there is. How often are people's checking accounts hacked? I don't know the answer to that. I would love to know the answer to that. Is it fairly frequent, like credit card fraud is? Or is it, and we all pay for that? That's why one of the reasons why we pay 29% interest rate on the credit card is we're paying for all that fraud. Or is it very infrequent? I mean, is it actually, as far as I can tell, it's not actually, when you talk to the voting experts, it's not actually possible to have a truly safe, a voting system that would be safe from industrial grade hackers like coming out of North Korea, or China or something like that, who want to mess with our elections. And, that's what concerns me. But,
so you're saying even if you go on and look and see how it shows how you voted, you're saying that the tally might not match up still?
Well, I'm saying that there would have to be some kind of an interface, and maybe it's possible to make that a fireproof wall or whatever, a firewall. There would have to be some sort of interface with the entire election system, which then, if not directly, indirectly puts the entire election system online, and that's where you've got some considerable risk. Although good chunks of our election system are online right now, they're just not supposed to be. It's the standards that are used, particularly in states like Georgia, where there's no paper trail whatsoever. And the ultimate receipt, Jennifer, and it's not really a receipt that you have, but the ultimate way of knowing that your vote was actually counted correctly is voting on paper, having those paper ballots counted by people, or if it's counted by a machine, have that machine be open source software, be owned by the government, and have that machine be tested in a series of random tests in every election. And then you have a high level of security, of belief that your vote was actually counted. But you look what happened in Georgia in the 2002 election. You had Max Cleland, a Vietnam War veteran, who lost 3 limbs in Vietnam. He lost both his legs and an arm in Vietnam, and is an actual certifiable war hero. And he was running against Sonny Perdue, as I recall, who was a draft dodger during Vietnam. And Sonny Perdue was running these ads saying that Max Cleland was not a patriot, right? That he was morphing Max Cleland's picture into that of Osama bin Laden. This was after 9/11. This was 2002 election, and Sonny was 4 points behind in the polls. And when the election was held, a week out, a month out, and on the day of the election, he was 4 points behind in the polls, and the exit polls showed him losing by 4 points. But the voting machines in Georgia showed him winning by 5 points. And, so therefore he became the United States Senator who replaced Max Cleland. And I think he still is. We had just left Georgia, 3 years before that happened. We lived in Georgia for 13 years. And it just blew my mind. And there was literally it was impossible to audit. You couldn't audit that election. The votes were held on memory cards, and they'd physically go around to all these voting locations and collect the memory cards, and somehow each memory card would hold 10, 20,000 votes, and somehow dozens of memory cards from downtown Atlanta, largely African-American area, and where it wasn't, it was largely progressive, the upscale parts of downtown Atlanta, somehow those memory cards got lost. Right, and we don't know where they went in the 2002 election, and that kind of thing is still going on in Georgia. I mean, this is like stuff we need to do something about. But Jennifer, we all need to be focusing on this like a laser, because I believe that our elections have been hijacked and stolen in part by voting fraud, in large part by citizen disenfranchisement. People simply being bounced off the voting rolls, and then they tell the exit pollster, yes, I voted for Max Cleland, but their vote never got counted because they got a provisional ballot, and they didn't realize that provisional ballot never gets counted, that kind of thing. So there's top to bottom. This is the book I just finished writing. I just sent it off to the editor, to the publisher, the Hidden History of the War on Voting, which will be out next spring. But we've got a lot of work to do. Jennifer, thank you for the call. It's excellent points all. Tom in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Happy Friday.
Yeah, hey, Tom, my apologies. We just have 20 seconds. You want to go for those 20 seconds, or you want to wait and I'll put you on hold?
I'll hold on.
Okay.
I'll hold on.
Okay, I'll put you on hold, and we'll talk about that. Comprehensive. This Media Matters for America just published a comprehensive list of former Fox employees with the Trump administration. Ben Carson, Elaine Chao, John Bolton, Mercedes Schlapp, Scott Brown, Georgette Mosbacher, Richard Grinnell, Tony Saya, Morgan Orr. These are all like State Department envoys and ambassadors. Leah Gabriel, Bill Shine, Heather Newert, Anthony Scaramucci, KT McFarland, Sebastian Gorka, John McEntee, and then, of course, the pending ones, Herman Cain and Stephen Moore. It's like Fox News has taken over the White House. Who could have imagined? Of course, Donald Trump was a Fox News employee, essentially.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
I don't think he was getting a paycheck, but, throughout the Obama administration, he was on Fox and Friends every week talking about how Obama was actually a Kenyan Muslim. Bizarre. And welcome back. Okay, Tom, let's try it. Let's try it this time. We've got 4 minutes.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks for watching us on Free Speech. What's up?
Yeah, two quick things. I want to mention an important anniversary today, and then another thing on messaging and how we can Americanize the message.
Sure.
So of course today is the anniversary of Franklin Roosevelt's passing, and of course he's the greatest progressive president we've ever had, and he's ranked next to Lincoln and Washington. And so I would appreciate it today if you could play the 2-minute clip of him doing his second Bill of Rights. You can find it anywhere, on YouTube.
Sure.
Where he mentions, it's Bernie Sanders 2.0, right?
Yep.
Or FDR 2.0. So the second thing was this messaging here, and a caller came in, talked about this Medicare for all, and that was an example of Americanizing the message, where everybody used to talk about single payer or universal plan. It didn't really hit till we Americanized it and called it Medicare for all, and it took off, right?
Yeah.
So here is another one. When they ask, a bumper sticker could be like, and this will blunt the socialism tag, and we have to have them fight on our turf. So when they say, do you believe in socialism? No, I believe in Rooseveltism. Mm-hmm. What is that? Well, you say Rooseveltism is Americanism. It's American as apple pie. And you could do a bumper sticker, I don't know, socialism, ? No, Rooseveltism, yes.
Yeah.
And that way, I've test-driven this with neighbors and relatives, and it works, and it gets people talking about what is Rooseveltism, and then you'll tell them, and they'll say, wasn't that socialism? You say, no, it's actually Americanism. The Republicans call it socialism. So something like that. It's a meme that it forces the Republicans to attack the greatest president who's ranked next to Lincoln and Washington. We want them attacking Americanism. See, when they use socialism, it makes us like we're defending the other, this foreign concept, right?
Right.
And so I don't know. It's worked for me, and I've always used it. I say, no, I believe in Rooseveltism, and it gets people talking. What are you talking about?
Yeah, that's I love it, Tom. I love it. I mean, and you're absolutely right. And Lyndon Johnson did a fair amount of that too with the Great Society, which was supposed to be a reboot of the New Deal. although he didn't go anywhere near as far as FDR did, but he did get Medicare passed, and he did get some fairly strong tools in the toolkit of government to raise people out of poverty and protect people from poverty. Go ahead.
Or when they say, do you believe in capitalism? You can just first say, I don't know why the Democrats stumble on this. And you just say, what kind? Answer the question with a question. What kind of capitalism? Right. Unregulated or regulated?
Right.
And then it takes off from there, and you talk about Roosevelt again, because that's all we're talking about. But the Republicans do not want to talk about Roosevelt because they know it'll smash Reaganism.
Yeah. Yeah,
I just don't know why.
Yeah, Roosevelt was the anti-Reagan, and Reagan was sold to the Republican base as the anti-Roosevelt. He was the guy who was going to dismantle the New Deal. And by the way, he did.
And they're still doing it.
Yes.
And they're probably baffled why the Democrats do not invoke FDR.
Yeah.
That is the battle.
Yeah. This morning, Stephanie Ruhle had this guy on, and they were talking about how to fix Social Security. And he was the no labels guy, right? Some old right-wing Democrat, and he was like, well, we can raise the tax, we can cut the benefits, we can deficit spend, and he never mentioned raising the cap. I'm literally yelling at the TV, raise the cap. He never mentioned it, and Stephanie Ruhle never mentioned anything about it. It just made me crazy. I was like, how does this kind of crap happen on MSNBC? Tom, thank you for the call. Spot on, and I'll play FDR at the top of the next hour. We'll be right back. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
In the world today, this report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, Ellen Ratner's new book. On the line with us from New York, the chief foreign correspondent for Talk Media News, Luke Vargas, who produces a 2-minute podcast every day. You can easily find at your favorite source. Luke, welcome back to the program. The International Criminal Court is ending an investigation of U.S. crimes in Afghanistan today. Now, one of the investigators of the criminal court was just denied a visa to come to the United States. We don't recognize their authority. I believe it was Bush who pulled us out of that. I could be wrong. What's going on here?
Yeah, well, we never really joined. I mean, this court only got off the ground in 2002. And so, you're right. There were some efforts made in the late parts of the Clinton administration to support this institution. I would add, though, that, I think there's tons of hypocrisy that rings through our stance towards the ICC. But you just bear in mind, the U.S. has worked with the ICC, giving them evidence against, some Congolese warlords who have been successfully prosecuted and some Islamists who were in Mali, who were convicted, found guilty of court several years ago for blowing up some heritage sites. And so, we use this court to our advantage. Though faced with the possibility that actions the U.S. took in Afghanistan in 2003 and 2004 may have amounted to American soldiers committing war crimes. In particular, these were the detention of suspects at some black sites, both in Afghanistan and elsewhere around the world as a part of the Bush war on terrorism. We just found that to be so unacceptable for our American exceptionalism that, you saw, as you rightly pointed out, several months ago, John Bolton, Mike Pompeo threatening to revoke visas to anyone in the criminal court that was continuing an investigation against the U.S. They followed through on that earlier this month. But, and we had even seen threats of the U.S. possibly going further. Pompeo gave a speech in March saying we might even consider economic sanctions against either, the court itself or its employees, basically seizing their assets or enforcing other sorts of international travel bans on them. That was pretty egregious, and it put us in terrible company, as you can imagine. I mean, the only two countries that had also physically blocked the prosecutors of the ICC from entering their countries were Sudan, after the Darfur genocide, under which they were investigating Omar al-Bashir, who's now in prison, and Burundi over recent election violence several years ago. So that's not good company. And I think, unfortunately, while I can sort of understand one of the arguments made by the judges today in deciding not to go ahead with this investigation, they basically said, look, because the U.S. is not cooperating and we can't get evidence as a result, this is going to be incredibly costly and likely going to result in failure. And, it's going to give false confidence if we do this for the next decade and can't deliver a verdict. It's going to give false confidence to the victims and people who are looking for justice here that at the end of the day actually could undermine the court even further. So based on the low likelihood of success, let's pull the court on this. My concern, though, is that the ICC already has this problem, and it's been losing some African members in recent years because basically the only situations where it can prosecute successfully are in these African countries and other places around the world where the government just doesn't really have the means or the protection to be able to shield itself from investigation. And looking at the 11 ongoing investigations the court is working on, and that 10 of them are in African countries, the fact that the U.S. now has shown that its power makes it off limits, I think sort of only furthers this, view that
it looks like neocolonialism.
Right. Well, that's the exact phrase that's been used by countries like Kenya and South Africa in sort of withdrawing cooperation in recent years. So I think this is pretty concerning. And it sets up this precedent, which, again, has sort of been informal to date, which is that you don't want to go down a road that's not going to be successful. But it sort of adds to that the powerful are protected here. And I think this is really concerning.
Yeah. Meanwhile, almost 1 billion people are going to the polls in India, and Prime Minister Modi, who is a Donald Trump-like character who loves to whip people up around religion and race and all these kinds of issues. What's going on with this?
Yeah, well, we just saw the head of his BJP party come out, Amit Shah, over the last day and call illegal Muslim immigrants who are in India termites, and say that a Bharatiya Janata Party government, which is the BJP party's real name, would, quote, pick up the infiltrators one by one and throw them into the Bay of Bengal, referring to immigrants from Bangladesh. Actually, 40,000 of those people are people who fled the genocide, Rohingya Muslims who fled from Myanmar. So these are people who really need international protection, but yet they're being used as the sort of the spark to try and kick off more communal violence, it seems. And let's bear in mind, as you pointed out, I mean, Modi's sort of Hindu nationalism has been stoking tensions in this country for years. You've had his supporters sort of agitating. I know it sounds funny, but it's a very serious issue there, basically accusing various Muslim families and rural communities of eating beef, pushing for the creation of
his supporters are regularly killing people in India.
Yeah, these vigilante groups that are protecting cows.
It's like the Klan.
It's pretty scary. It's a way for young people, young men in particular, to sort of use violence against Muslims and people who are accused of eating beef, which are sacred in Hindu religion, as, a demonstration of one's religious devotion and their patriotism. And these comments and other comments also by a BJP chief in Uttar Pradesh a few weeks ago, that opponents of Modi must necessarily be sick with a, quote, green virus, green being the color of Islam, certainly means this Modi government is something we should fear.
Amazing. Trumpism lives all over the world. It's startling. Luke Vargas, thank you, Luke.
Thank you.
Check out Luke's podcast. He does it every day. It's 2 minutes. Talk Media News. Just plug it into your search engine over at wherever you're getting your podcast. We'll be back with Anything Goes Friday in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
You know, we put together the coolest little newsletter every single day, or every single weekday, every day that we do our show. And Sue Nethercutt is the editor of it, and she does such a brilliant job with this thing. It's absolutely free, by the way. It's, you know, all you have to do is go over to thomhartmann.com and just sign up for it. Sign up for the free newsletter. And we don't sell the list or share it or any of that kind of stuff. So, you know, it's just coming to you, and that's it. And every day, as we're doing the show, Sue is listening to the show, and she is finding the websites for all the articles and all the stories and all the topics, broadly speaking, that I'm talking about on radio and on TV. And then she puts the links in there. We call it Sue's Daily Stack, and it's literally a link to every article that I've referenced and every broad topic that I've talked about. I think you'll find it really a valuable asset, particularly to help you win the water cooler wars. So be sure to check it out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. It's free. It's our newsletter. Thanks a lot. We're reading today from Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for White Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, Amex, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces, under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980 because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum No. 39. The strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so the South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
The book A Woman of No Importance by Sonia Purnell.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our show. I mentioned I went on basically a rant in the last hour about about the election in Georgia in 2002. It happened just 3 years after Louise and I had moved out of the state, and I was saying that Sonny Perdue had beat Max Cleland on the electronic voting machines, even though all the polls showed that he had actually lost to Max Cleland. I was wrong. It's Saxby Chambliss was the Republican who won that election. So, and thank you to Harold Taylor for tweeting that to me. I appreciate it. I like to correct stuff when it's wrong. As Tom pointed out in the last hour, it is the anniversary of the death of Franklin Roosevelt today. And just a few months before he died, he gave a speech suggesting that we should have a second Bill of Rights, and that these rights should be enshrined literally in our Constitution. This should be how things, the basis for all laws, right? So if you say you have a right to an education, then you can't mess with education. If you have a right to health care, then you can't hold that back from people. And he was literally calling for us to rewrite the Constitution with the second Bill of Rights. Here he is. This is a 2-minute clip of Franklin Roosevelt talking about this.
In our day, certain economic truths have become accepted as self-evident. A second Bill of Rights, under which a new basis of security and prosperity can be established for all, regardless of station or race or creed. Among these are the right to a useful and remunerative job, the right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing and recreation, the right of every farmer to raise and sell his products at a return which will give him and his family a decent living, the right of every businessman, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom, freedom from unfair competition and domination by monopolies at home or abroad.
Monopoly.
The right of every family to a decent home. The right to adequate medical care and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health. The right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment. The right to a good education. All of these rights spell security. And after this war is won, we must be prepared to move forward in the implementation of these rights to new goals of human happiness and well-being. For unless there is security here at home, there cannot be lasting peace in the world.
Amen. Amen. And, you know, the right to a job. And that's what he did in the New Deal. If you couldn't find a job, the government would hire you. It would provide a job to you. There were a lot of things that needed to be done, and there still are, right? The $3 trillion worth of infrastructure that needs repairing right now. The right to a job, the right to health care, the right to education, the right to housing, no more homelessness. And on a, you know, we have actually more empty houses in the United States that are owned by investors than we have homeless people. Let that one sink in. So anyhow, this is you know, a great opportunity. And Tom was talking about how, you know, when people say, well, do you believe in capitalism? You say, well, what kind? Regulated or unregulated? And that starts that conversation. You know, do you believe in the, you know, fill in the blank? Well, no, I'm a, you know, what kind of Democrat are you? Are you a socialist? No, I'm a Roosevelt Democrat. Well, what the heck is that? There it is. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Norma, what's on your mind today? It's Anything Goes Friday, so we're taking your calls. Norma, I'm sorry.
Well, first of all, I wanted to tell, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now.
Okay. All right. I wanted to tell Charles that he was right, that supporting free speech TV is one of the main things we need to do. We need to educate people about your show. We need to educate people about Amy Goodman. And I do this every day. Being a disabled person, I can't carry a lot of stuff at one time, so I do a lot of shopping. And when I'm standing in line, I'm talking. I'm pushing expanded Medicare for all, single payer. And I explain to them that here in Montgomery, did you hear about the hepatitis II outbreak at one of our most popular, well-regarded restaurants? If that person had had health care, he would not have been at work. The restaurant's still closed.
Right.
I teach people that, yeah, the things you have taught us, particularly, you know, I've been sitting here for over 10 years as a proud student of the University of Thom Hartmann. I have that bumper sticker on my truck. I have Free Speech TV bumper sticker on my truck. I have a Bernie bumper sticker. I use these things to start conversations, and then I try to teach people. I teach them how you taught us about the Powell Memorandum and how his reward was becoming a Supreme Court justice.
Yep.
I teach them about Pennsylvania Coal versus Mahan. I teach them, you know, I don't remember what year it was, but you were going through all these corporations, Supreme Court cases that changed our laws. The railway out in California at Santa Cruz, I can't remember the name of that off the top of my head.
Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad, yeah.
Yes, Santa Clara County. And how that essentially started eminent domain. And then how these corporations...
Corporate personhood, that's what it started, corporate personhood, yeah.
Yes, and how this you know, affects us. Here in Alabama, we got a new tax, 3% on Alabama Power. That 3%, they said that 1.5 million customers would pay that with an average of $5 a month to clean up the coal ash ponds for the past 100 years. Wait a minute, you know, excuse me, why are we paying to clean up the power company's mess?
Right.
Why isn't this coming out of their expense budget?
Right.
No. People are paying for this because you can't interfere with a corporation's right to make a profit. You know, Charles was so right about telling people about you and telling people about Amy. And I go out, I have printed off this stuff, and so when I'm talking to people, I hand it out. And they're looking at me like, what? Why didn't I know this? I said, because you're watching mainstream media. It's like you're sitting there this morning screaming at the TV, raise the cap. I do the same thing. Yeah. And then I go out and I talk about what I've seen, what I've heard, to try and educate people.
Yeah,
it's the same time.
I'm sorry.
The same time, I'm handing out voter registration forms, and I'm teaching them to make sure that they update their address and they update their voter registration form so their votes are not thrown in the trash.
Right, especially in what might be blue parts of Alabama. Norma, thank you for that, and thanks for that lesson. And let me say to people who are listening to us on a commercial radio station, please support your sponsors. You don't even have to buy products from the sponsors, although that's always a good idea. You can still call the sponsor and say, you know, I'm not going to buy a new car this month, but I am going to tell my friends about you in the event that they're going to, or I'm not going to buy a new mattress this month. But, you know.
And one thing, Tom.
Go ahead.
When I'm talking to people, they say they don't have TV. I tell them, well, then great. Go out on the Internet and pull up Dr. Tom's show. Like the show Monday, Lamar, what's his name? I can't remember.
Lamar Waldron, yeah.
Yeah, I said, go up and pull it up on YouTube and watch this segment and then share it with your friends so that you can understand what is happening today in Washington.
Yeah, amen. And we are live on Free Speech TV. We're live on Facebook Live. We're live on YouTube. You know, we've got commercial radio stations. We're on nonprofit stations all over the country. We're on Pacifica. You know, we're on 3 of the big 5 Pacifica stations now. We're on dozens of smaller Pacifica stations, maybe more than that. Again, if they're in a fund drive, help them out, just like you want to help out Free Speech TV. Norma, thanks so much. I need to move along. I don't want to make this all, you know, this day all about my show, but I appreciate your kind words, and mostly I appreciate your activism. You are such an extraordinary example for all of us of you know,
well,
what...
we have to wake them up, Dr. Tom. We have to wake them up.
You bet, Norma, and you're doing a great job. Thank you so much. It's great to hear from you. It's always great to hear from you, Norma. It's 15 minutes past the hour and change here, and we'll be back with more of your calls. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Speaking the truth, the multinational corporations would really rather you didn't know all about. And boy, I've got to tell you what the Arkansas GOP is up to after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Stick around. We'll be right back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday. And welcome back. Kevin, watching us on YouTube in Chicago. Speaking of YouTube, in Chicago. Hey, Kevin, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I think I have a potential legal challenge to the Texas abortion law that you were talking about today.
Okay.
I think if a group of people got together and established a church or a 501c3 and call it the Church of the Divinity of Women, and then get members to join, you could open up to women 13 years and older, they could claim membership to an organization and a faith that they believe in the absolute right of a woman to protect her body or anything that comes from her body, and use that as a potential challenge against any right-wing evangelical counterpoint.
Yeah, it's. I'm not sure where the. I mean, you know, it's not that the right to choose is in the Bible. It's that abortion is not in the Bible. In fact, you know, what is in the Bible is that if you beat up a woman and causes her to abort, you have to pay her husband a certain amount of money, and the amount of money is actually defined. I think it's in Deuteronomy. And but that's about it. And of course, God has caused numerous abortions. There's many places in the Bible, you know, where as punishment God caused women to abort. But
don't you think, Tom, that if it came down to a Supreme Court challenge between one religious belief versus another, that they would want to stay clear of that challenge and say, you know what, this person has an absolute conviction and right to believe what they believe.
Not this Supreme Court. No. But I can tell you, Kevin, if men could get pregnant, abortion would not only be legal, it would be a sacrament in the Catholic Church.
I agree.
I mean, it would be, you know, part of the sacred rituals. Kevin, thank you for the call. I mean, you know, all the ideas we can get. Mike in Oxford, Florida. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Well, before I make the comment, I just want to say recently I made my donation to Free Speech TV.
Good on you, Mike. Thank you.
Did my duty there. But anyway, what I always want to talk about, it's a little bit different topic, but it's about, you know, we've got some great candidates running for office as Democrats. But the one thing, I think maybe Eric Swalwell, now that he's running, has talked about this, that one of the first things that we need to do, wherever they are, is they're going to have to kind of go into the White House, providing they're elected, and kind of do a triage of the entire government and see what's left of all the agencies and, where the damage has been done. Kind of like a storm came through, you go through a town and see where the storm happened overnight, where the tornado came through or something.
It's a great metaphor
fire.
or a great analogy, yeah. I agree. I absolutely agree, Mike. You still there?
I mean,
yeah.
It just seems that, like, look at what's happened to DHS, and you hear about, the State Department's been decimated.
Yeah. Yeah, and Trump is now, by the way, he just tweeted that he wants to put undocumented, actually asylum seekers in sanctuary cities. And I'm like, well, that's going to lower the crime rate, right? It's going to reduce the crime rate in these cities. You really want to do that? I mean, the guy has, either he believes that undocumented immigrants are actually criminals, or he believes that his followers believe it. And I think that probably the latter is the case.
I think they do. They actually do. Because I live in a place, I just live outside the Villages, Florida. A lot of retirees. They're from all over the country. But I mean, a good percentage, not all, but a good percentage. Are they there? You there?
Yeah, I am. Finish your sentence, Mike.
Okay. I was going to say, they are very hardcore Trump, and I mean, some of the things these people say for little grandparents and stuff, man, it is pretty hardcore about what they say about people that are immigrants.
Yeah, no, I get it. If they watch Fox News, they've been brainwashed. Man, it's a genuine tragedy. Mike, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
It's Anything Goes Friday. Richard in Evanston, Illinois. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind?
Oh, hi. You just mentioned something. You recall back a while ago, I'm calling about the Electoral College and voting machines,
sure.
But Japan would not import our beef. This was maybe 15, 20 years ago. I was in the meat business. So
yeah, this was during the mad cow scare.
Yep. So we still, now we have laws that don't allow people to photograph mad cows being slaughtered for our consumption. So, but anyway, the reason I called was you were talking about the voting machines, and I kind of think the mistake is not to include the Electoral College when you're on that topic, as well as putting it in the constitutional framework, because it's our most sacred right is the vote. Your vote counts. Yet, they can steal it, they can take away your right to vote. But even if you vote for the president, my phone rang, sorry. Even if you vote for the president, the Electoral College factors your vote.
Well, only when you vote for the president. That's the only place where the Electoral College is involved, yeah.
That's the point. Would it be acceptable to vote for your governor in such a way, your senator, your House of Representative person, your alderman?
No, we need to do away with the Electoral College. And there's this fairvote.org is the website. There's an organization that has put together this initiative, and once enough states sign on to it, that they represent a majority of Electoral College votes, then those states all commit to throw their Electoral College votes toward whoever wins the popular vote, regardless of what the Electoral College vote is, or regardless of how their state went. And so that would create a national, real vote, whatever you would call popular vote, for the presidency, and it would render the Electoral College irrelevant, and without a constitutional amendment. And the group that is blocking this is the red states. The red states are refusing to go along with this. We just added one state. I think it was Colorado just added themselves to this list recently, but we're still, I think, about 70 or 80 Electoral College votes short.
Yeah, Tom, I was just going to say that all those things, whenever we talk, we shouldn't just talk about one of those 3 or 4 things that are the flaws. It ought to be all put together and put under the, as the Republicans would do, talk about your sacred rights.
Right.
And then pointing out that you don't really have a right to vote. Your vote for the president, in essence, does not count.
Well,
depending on the state you're in.
As William Rehnquist famously wrote in his decision in Bush v. Gore 2000, where George Bush claimed that if the votes in Florida were actually counted, as the Florida Supreme Court had demanded, if the votes in Florida were actually counted, it would, quote, cause irreparable harm to plaintiff George W. Bush. Right. End of quote. I mean, that's literally from the lawsuit, right? That if they count the vote, it'll cause irreparable harm to George Bush, and that's why Bush sued Gore. And in that decision, Rehnquist, in his decision, William Rehnquist, Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, and who made his chops back in the 60s in Arizona, he's a big bear of a guy, 6'2", 200 pounds, big guy, used to stand outside, inside polling stations in Hispanic and Native American communities and just give people hell if they were trying to vote. William Rehnquist wrote, and I quote from memory, but I'm pretty sure I'm quoting word for word, there is no right to vote for the President of the United States in the United States Constitution. End of quote. And he was right.
And he's true. And it was true.
Yep. And we need to fix that. Richard, spot on. Thank you for the call. Glenn in New York City. Hey, Glenn, what's up?
Yeah, I think we should call it FDR socialism, FDR liberal.
Amen.
Instead, they're trying to sneer the word liberal, make it, slander it.
Yep.
And every chance they get, and if they let them argue with FDR.
Yeah, I am an FDR liberal. I am an FDR progressive. I am an FDR socialist, and that's going to cause particularly young people to go back and go, who? Who was FDR? Right? And that's a good educational process. Glenn, spot on. Thank you for that. Michelle in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Michelle, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I was calling to follow up from the discussion the other day about Fox News and the cult-like thing. I wanted to just put out a story in my family about Pat Robertson. Mm-hmm. This charlatan has been at it from the 70s and 80s. And if you're somebody who believes in his right-wing ideology, he throws in a little bit of scripture and really has some people totally convinced that he is the authority, that God speaks to him, and he has really put out a lot of really people who listen to him are not able to think for themselves. And unfortunately, in my family, I had some not elderly, but going towards retirement relatives who lost a substantial amount of their savings because this moron told people that God told him that the stock market was going to crash. And they went out and made some very poor financial decisions. And I see with him, I've seen him since I've been a child. He is very influential, and I really think there needs to be more of a spotlight on how influential he really is, because I've seen people literally lose their savings because
I absolutely agree with you, Michelle. The 700 Club and Pat Robertson. Pat Robertson is a billionaire. You know, he sold his little empire for $1 billion, all built on nonprofit, all built with our support. And he's a hustler. He's just another one of these evangelical hustlers. Michelle, thank you.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
In fact, I'd take it a step farther than that. I would say that him and Jim Baker and these other kinds of televangelists, they're actually cult leaders. Today we're reading from the Polar Bear Expedition, the heroes of America's forgotten invasion of Russia, 1918-1919. It's a story, by the way, that the Russians remember well, but most Americans are unaware of. This is from the prologue, Nizhny Gora, Russia, January 19th, 1919. They've been expecting it for weeks, hell, months. And so the men of Company 8 of the 339th Infantry Regiment, the Polar Bears, as they would come to call themselves, have stood night and day in 40 below zero temperatures. They stamp their feet and try not to touch bare skin on the frozen barrels of their weapons, lest their flesh be ripped off. They peer through the deep ebony night of their dark log-lined dugouts into the frigid tundra toward the south and east across the ice-choked river and watch for it, wait for it, and wonder how many will come and how they will perform when they do. And they wonder, too, if and how they will ever get out of this place, this frozen Hades, this last place on Earth at the top of the world. And then early on this morning, they do come, a horde of them, dim forms in the distance spread out across the Vaga River. Some on skis, others on snowshoes, all of them armed, like ghost warriors traversing the river's Styx. Hundreds of them to their mere handful of 46. Bolos, the men call them, Bolsheviks. Now a shell flung from upriver, arcing and piercing the barely gray of dawn, flies over the village. Lieutenant Harry Meade awakens with a start, quickly dons his fur hat and overcoat and boots, and races to the far outpost where this scant group of half-dozen men stands guard against not only the enemy, but the tide of history. The sergeant hands him his field glasses, and he squints through the misty, blowing snow. The only sounds, the sharp snapping of frozen tree branches and the dull booming of the river ice cracking. He sees them now, coming on several hundred yards at the distance, and he quickly understands that the company is probably doomed. Now a grayish form enters his view, much closer, and he peels the glass from his eye. Steam comes from his mouth as the thin outpost is now about to be overrun by a nearer group of the enemy, who have snuck closer and rise like dervishes from their concealment in the deep snow. Lieutenant Harry Meade, late of Valparaiso, Indiana, and Detroit, Michigan, stranded more than 200 miles from his regiment's base at Archangel, Russia, doesn't have to speak as the mass of Bolos descends on his small attachment. His men are already furiously firing their machine guns and rifles at this grisly apparition, all while more artillery shells spew over them and land amid them. But Meade yells the words anyway, as if by rote, as if it's not too late, as if any of them has a chance. Fire, Meade orders his men. For God's sake, fire! Chapter 1, The March to Intervention. The preliminaries began on March 9th, 1918, with millions of high explosive and gas shells raining across the front between the northern French cities of Pré and Saint-Quentin. The smothering of the British-held territory continued through the week and beyond, and was topped off with a continuous salvo from 6,700 pieces of German artillery, which began at 4:30 in the morning on March 21st. 5 hours later, heavy mortars began raining death and destruction on the British Fifth Army, and 5 minutes later, the advance of 3 German armies, 69 divisions in all, poured from their trenches and headed east, with the aim of splitting the junction of British and French forces on the southern end of the Somme front and sending the Brits in a panic for the protection of the Channel ports. There was an urgency to the assault, and for good reason. With the signing of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk on March 3rd, Russia had officially taken itself out of the war and relieved the pressure on Germany's eastern front. After years of fighting a two-front war, German forces were now consolidated. Meanwhile, the United States, which had declared war on Germany nearly a year before, had yet to send enough men across the Atlantic to tip the balance in the Allies' favor on the Western Front. But the Yanks were coming. During that spring of 1918, therefore, Germany had a small and unique window in which to act, while the numbers favored them, and so the hand-picked assault troops went forward in great and deadly haste. Above the attackers, 326 fighter aircraft soared into the morning with their opposition just 261 British planes. Following barrages, small teams of stormtroopers appeared out of the deep fog and, ignoring the British strongpoints, cut swaths through the trenches with light machine guns, automatic weapons, and flamethrowers. By the end of the first day of what would be a months-long offensive, the Germans had pushed more than 4 miles through the British and were still advancing. In their wake, they left the bodies of an untold number of defenders, thousands of wounded, and 21,000 prisoners. By March 23rd, 3 huge guns made by the arms manufacturer Krupp had been hauled forward and began sending shells into Paris, 72 miles away. 200 Parisians would be killed on that day alone. Those unlucky Parisians would be but grains of sand in an ocean of war that had enveloped France since August of 1914, when a gray tide of Germans had pushed across the border with Belgium and by early September had very nearly taken Paris. The flood was checked on the Marne River east of the French capital in early September, but the war, it would eventually become known as the Great War, had only begun. The Germans intended to stay, and by the end of 1914, a dizzying series of parallel zigzagging trenches, French, German, and to the north, those of France's British allies, scarred the French soil. The Polar Bear Expedition.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Amazing. Robert McGuire tweets, can we all just appreciate for a moment that the older sister of the sitting president of the United States just retired so as to avoid an inquiry into a decades-long tax fraud scheme she participated in with the president, who is still in office? And Hillary Clinton replied with a tweet, yes, we can. I love it. Tony in Los Lunas, New Mexico. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Good to talk to you again.
Thank you. What's up?
I'm calling about another Second Amendment issue. There's out of Hawaii, there is a Senate Concurrent Resolution 42, which is a petition to the U.S. Congress to either redefine, amend, or repeal the Second Amendment.
Okay.
Yeah, and and one of the things that I wanted to call you and talk and for you and all your listeners, because I listen every day, is an understanding about the Second Amendment, the Constitution.
Is this, Tony? Is this a resolution, and it would just be kind of a sense of this of the Hawaii Senate kind of thing, or House?
Sure. Sure.
Is that resolution in response to the Heller decision?
No. This actually came out right after the New Zealand thing.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an anti-gun resolution. Okay.
Yeah. Well,
and one of the things that I would really like for people to understand is that from and honestly, I think the majority of gun owners' view of the Second Amendment is that it's a civil right that is listed in the Constitution. Mm-hmm. However, it is what do you want to call it's a natural right, a right to self-defense.
But it's not listed that way in the Constitution, actually. The two reasons that the Second Amendment was ratified, the southern states wanted to ratify it because it gave to the individual states the power to maintain a militia. And those militias in the southern states were called slave patrols. And Patrick Henry gave a big speech at the Virginia Ratifying Convention in 1789 specifically about that. And in fact, he forced James Madison to change the language from "for the security of a free nation" to "for the security of a free state." And Madison had to do that so that Virginia could keep their slave patrols. The northern states agreed with Thomas Jefferson, who was ironically a Virginia slaveholder, but the northern states ratified it because they believed that we should not have a standing army during times of peace, that the standing army should be collapsed because they were most of these, this was the 1700s. All of these people were familiar with the history of Europe over the previous 200 years when government after government after government had been overthrown by its own military. And so Jefferson, read some of his letters to Madison, when he was in France in 1787 and 1788, particularly in December of 1787, after Madison sent him a copy of the first draft of the Constitution. And Jefferson says, I will not support this. I will torpedo this thing if you don't put into this an explicit limit on the military. And they did. They went back and they changed it so that the military can only be funded for 2 years, literally every 2 years. It's the only thing in the entire Constitution that has a time limit, and it's the only thing that Congress is limited in what they can appropriate and spend money for, and that's the military. No military appropriation, except for the Navy, no military appropriation shall last more than 2 years, so that literally every 2 years, Congress has to decide, do we want to continue to have an army? And the replacement for the Army, like Switzerland has done, was supposed to be the local militias. Those were the two reasons the Second Amendment was passed. There was literally no conversation. And I just wrote a book on this, Tony, and so I went through and I read all of these debates. There was no discussion in the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787, no discussion about self-defense. There was no discussion about defending yourself against an authoritarian or overreaching government. The only discussions had to do with those two things, maintaining the slave patrols in the South and not having a standing army, period. That's why the Second Amendment was ratified.
Well, Tom, what I was trying to get to is that I'm well aware of what you've said. I listen to you all the time, okay? But the point that I want to make is that it really doesn't matter. It's much like what the Constitution says, and it's much like what here in the state of New Mexico and many of the other states, like nullification. In other words, where the sheriffs here have said that they're not going to enforce unconstitutional laws. Well, most of the gun owners in this country will tell you that you could repeal the Second Amendment, and that doesn't mean that we're going to give up our guns.
Right.
Okay. So, in other words, and you know, there was what happened in Texas with the Mexicans was, you know, mola en labe, you know, come and take it. And I know you say, you know, that's a delusional thing against, you know, a tyrannical governor or whatever. But I want you to understand, if 1 million armed citizens were to descend on Washington, D.C., they could change everything in a day.
I don't think so. I think that is the fever dream of the hard right. That is the Turner Diaries.
I know you say that's a delusional thing, but I'm just telling you.
I know that they believe it. And that's the thing that scares the hell out of me, is that there's a whole bunch of people who believe that, and there would be bloodshed if a million armed people descended on Washington, D.C. But you do not take on the U.S. military successfully with small arms, basically, even AR-15s. You can't do it. And that's why, you know, nobody in the Constitutional Convention of the ratifying, or any of the state ratifying conventions, was stupid enough to suggest that we need to have an armed citizenry in case our governments that we just created ever become tyrannical. I get your point, Tony, and I think that you know, we do need to redefine the Second Amendment back to its original sources. You know, the first time that anybody even proposed the idea that the reason the Second Amendment was written was to defend us against a tyrannical government was a piece in 1974 in the Rifleman magazine, the NRA's magazine, written by a teenager who was just suggesting this as an idea, and you know, they took it and ran with it. I mean, it's nuts. But anyhow, Tony, I got to move along. There's other topics, but good thinking. Joe in Vermont, Illinois. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, that's a perfect prelude to my question, which is, why can't the citizens sue the government for having an unconstitutional standing army?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to it.
Because in that D.C. Heller case, all 9 Supreme Court justices reached the conclusion, they disagreed on the final outcome, but they all agreed that it was to protect, the Second Amendment was there to protect us from a standing army.
No, there was that. You know, that was not even part of the discussion in the Heller agreement, in the Heller decision. There's literally no mention of that in the Heller decision. Well, read me the part that refers to protecting us from a standing army. Then.
Okay. 1 second. Let me flip to it. Yeah, even in the even Scalia, he admits there.
Scalia talks about hearth and kin and all this kind of stuff. I mean, he goes back to documents from the 1790s that had nothing to do with military or guns to you know, make it sound like he was channeling the intent of the founders of these, you know, 18th century slaveholders. But, you know, it's the fact of the matter is this had, you know, and maybe there's a reference to the Second Amendment, you know, the word militia in the Second Amendment and the debate around a standing army. But you will find nothing
Right.
in the Heller decision that supports the idea that the Second Amendment was passed to stop, to be able to shut down the military of the United States. It was to replace a standing army, the state militias.
It says the preamble of the Second Amendment makes 3 important points. It identifies the preservation of the militia as the amendment's purpose.
Right.
It explains that the militia is necessary to the security of a free state.
Right.
And that the militia must be well regulated.
Correct.
And when Jefferson
Those are all true.
Madison and when Jefferson told Madison, we need a check against the standing army, Madison replied to him, that's what the Second Amendment is.
No, there is no reference. No, I'm sorry. There is.
You could read that.
You're not. Are you? You're not quoting that. These are your words, not from the Heller decision.
No, actually, that first quote was directly.
No, I mean the first quote was, but when you said when Jefferson told Madison, Madison said, no, that's not what happened. Well, when Jefferson said, there can't be standing armies. Yes, Madison said the Second Amendment is going to prevent the standing army, but it wasn't because the citizens are armed. It's because we have a militia instead of an army. There's a real big difference between those two concepts.
Exactly. But so it would seem, though, if we want to protect against a standing army, why wouldn't, and that's what the point in the Second Amendment is. And then, we have the appropriations every 2 years. We have a standing army. If it is unconstitutional, can't we file a lawsuit for it?
No, it's not unconstitutional. What happens is literally every 2 years. That's why it's called must-pass legislation. The defense bill, the defense appropriations bill. It has to be passed every 2 years, or the Army gets shut down, and the Air Force, and everything except the Navy. Right? That's what the Constitution requires. It's in Article 1, Section 8, and so we just keep recycling it. The way to stop it is to elect officials, is to elect a House and Senate who are willing to scrutinize the Pentagon's budget. I'm not an advocate of doing away with our standing army, frankly. I have tremendous concerns about the nature of our army right now. Jefferson was very, very pleased with the fact that, he said, particularly because of the militias, he said, we shall never have an army where people are willing to be shot at for a sixpence. He says, I'm so pleased that that pauperism is not so endemic in America, that we have an army that is willing to be shot at for a sixpence. Well, now we have an army that's willing to be shot at for a sixpence. Probably the majority of people who have joined the army have done so because poverty was their alternative. And that's a terrible, terrible thing. And that's why I think we should reinstitute the draft. We need to have an army that actually reflects the makeup of America. And that is one of the things that diminishes the risk of a military coup, of an army misbehaving. And Trump is doing everything he can, by the way, right now, to turn the army against the American people. And the starting of this is down at the southern border, where he's trying to turn the army into essentially a police force or an anti-immigration force in defiance of the Posse Comitatus laws, which say that the U.S. Army shall never turn its guns on American civilians ever again. This was passed in, I think, 1873.
I'll email you the quote of Madison responding to Jefferson that the Second Amendment would be a strong enough check against the standing army.
Is that from Heller?
No, that's Madison. I'll give you the direct quote.
Okay, great. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it. But yeah, but it may well be, Joe. I mean, that you're absolutely right. That is what Madison said, but it was the existence of the militia, not the existence of the guns. Joe, thanks for the call.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
But again, that quote is not in Heller, and that's my whole point. Heller was a fantasy decision that in the brain of Scalia. And welcome back. Jerry in Wapaton, North Dakota, watching us on YouTube. Am I saying the name of your town right, Jerry?
Yeah, yes, you did, Tom.
Hey,
thank you for taking my call.
Sure, thank you for calling.
The purpose of my call today is I had seen an article put out there by UPI on February 14th titled Trump is in good health and on an increased dose of cholesterol medication.
Right.
Well, if you look up the side effects of a statin drug, it is well known they cause memory problems.
Oh, really?
And
I knew they could cause serious muscle problems. I have a friend who ended up in a wheelchair as a result of taking statins.
Yeah. So they upped his dose, according to this article, from 10 to 40 milligrams.
Wow.
His cholesterol did go down, according to his medical report, from 196 to 196 from 223 last year, but he did gain a few pounds. But, you know, his memory problems are getting kind of scary. I mean, with him, he is such a pathological liar. How do you know if he's lying or if he's having a Crestor moment?
Right.
He can't remember where his father was born now. He can't, he couldn't remember that he was a WikiLeaks fan during the election. And every day there's something out there.
Oh, I think those are lies,
memory.
Jerry. I don't think that those are memory problems.
Well, I know, but how do we really know? I mean, there was a report last week on certain, media outlets that his staff is getting concerned that he's getting too old to campaign. He's lost his enthusiasm for going out here to the Midwest and being with his base. Now, this is where he gets his narcissistic fill. But we don't
But he's
know
still doing
exactly
rallies, Jerry. He's still doing rallies.
I know, but they said he's not doing as many as he used to do because he's tired. He's complaining about fatigue.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't seen that story.
So I bring all this up. I bring this up, Tom, just to throw that ball out there. And he's also on Ambien, they reported. He takes that when he's flying. Well, these are two of the top 10 drugs that that cause people to have memory problems.
Yeah.
And with people talking about maybe he needs a 25th Amendment review, how do we separate all this stuff out?
Well, and you're right. Ambien is one of the Z drugs, and the Z drugs are kind of weaker versions of the benzo drugs, and the benzo drugs have a well-documented association with memory loss, particularly when they're taken over a long period of time. But apparently Trump is just using Ambien when he's outside the country for jet lag, which is, frankly, what I've used it for. I don't use Ambien, but another drug in that same class. If I'm going to Europe or anywhere, actually, if I'm more than 6 or 7 time zones out, I'll take a sleeping pill. I think that's a normal and healthy thing. But the problem with the 25th Amendment, it does. If you compare Trump today to Trump 30 years ago, and there are YouTube comparisons side by side, it's shocking how much cognitive decline has crept in, A. And B, the only remedy that it seems we have for this is, as you point out, Jerry, the 25th Amendment. And that requires an initial finding, essentially, an initial assertion by the Vice President of the United States. Now, do you think Mike Pence is going to challenge Donald Trump?
Well, it depends on what job he wants.
Yeah, there is that. There is that.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Jerry. Good points all. And a little scary. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Anything Goes Friday. We put together the coolest little newsletter every single day, or every single weekday, every day that we do our show. And Sue Nethercutt is the editor of it, and she does such a brilliant job with this thing. It's absolutely free, by the way. It's, all you have to do is go over to thomhartmann.com and just sign up for it. Sign up for the free newsletter. And we don't sell the list or share it or any of that kind of stuff. So, it's just coming to you, and that's it. And every day, as we're doing the show, Sue is listening to the show, and she is finding the websites for all the articles and all the stories and all the topics, broadly speaking, that I'm talking about on radio and on TV. And then she puts the links in there. We call it Sue's Daily Stack, and it's literally a link to every article that I've referenced and every broad topic that I've talked about. I think you'll find it really a valuable asset, particularly to help you win the water cooler wars. So be sure to check it out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. It's free. It's our newsletter. Thanks a lot.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thom Hartmann. Oh, welcome back. Anything Goes Friday. Freddie in Oak Lawn, Illinois. Hey, Freddie, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good.
I'm really enjoying your show today. I'm a small monthly subscriber. I just wanted to put out to your listeners about the neo-Nazi thing. I live in the 3rd Congressional District of Illinois, and my congressman is Lipinski, and he ran against this fellow by the name of Arthur Jones, an avowed neo-Nazi.
Oh, my.
Well, of course, you know that Lipinski won, and he's kind of a secret Republican. But anyway, my point is that this 58,000 people voted for Arthur Jones. So if you just use the 10% rule, and, you know, that's an awful lot of brown shirts, because maybe everybody didn't know he was a neo-Nazi, all the Republicans that voted for him, but I bet you a lot of them did. So we have to keep an eye on this kind of thing. I'm a brown person. I'm a Mexican-American, and you know, this kind of stuff has me a little bit worried about all this stirring up of all these feelings going on in this country, Tom. But anyway, I love your show, and have a nice weekend.
Thank you, Freddie, and I share your concerns. I'm not a brown-skinned person, but I still share your concerns, and I think that we all should. It's like the idea that you know, Fox News and right-wing hate radio and Donald Trump would be using the color of people's skin or their religion. And in the case of Ilhan Omar, it's a twofer for Fox News and the New York Post. They're using both as ways to demonize people. It just puts targets on the back of other American citizens. It is awful. Freddie, thank you for the call, and thanks for sharing your story with us. Alex in Niles, Illinois. Hey, Alex, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Long-time listener.
Thank you.
Basically, I want to continue this discussion regarding the voting system, technical aspects of voting system. It's easy to implement blockchain technology to avoid any fraud, any discrepancies. So you can have a public ledger, distributed ledger, electronic, where all transactions, like voting transactions, will tell you whom you're voting for, when, where. So it's quite easy.
Yeah. No, I think by and large you're right, Alex, although we're starting to learn that there are some kind of sketchy problems with blockchain, or at least blockchain can be manipulated. There was that big scam that was run out of, I think it was Japan recently, where investors lost millions of dollars in a what they thought was a blockchain thing.
It's easy to steal, but if it's a government system, I don't think so.
Right. Yeah, that's very much a possibility. I would still want the computers to be owned by the government, and I would still want the software to be open source. But that's probably the one area where there's a high level of security that could be brought to something done on the internet. Alex, thank you for that. Lynn in Oakland, California. Hey, Lynn, what's up?
Oh, good morning. It's a thrill to talk to you.
Thank you.
I want to plug a term that I heard on Bill Maher a couple of weeks ago, capitalism plus.
Right.
And I think it would really be a great thing for progressives to use this term when you get stuck with defending socialism. You know? It's capitalism plus a safety net.
Plus a what? I'm sorry, you faded out.
Excuse me?
You said capitalism plus a, and then your voice went away.
Oh, a safety net. You know,
a safety net. Capitalism plus a safety net. Yeah.
Yeah. And we could use that instead of some of the more awkward social democracy explanations and something. I think it would go over very well.
Yeah. Capitalism plus. I'm still fond of Tom's suggestion that, I'm in favor of regulated capitalism, and I'm an FDR capitalist, or I'm an FDR Democrat. Solid stuff. Lynn, thanks so much for the call and for reminding us about this, brilliant thing out of Bill Maher's show. And thanks so much for being with us today and all this week. It's been quite a week. More craziness coming out of the White House. It's like every day. It's a fire hose. It just never stops. I yearn for the days when we can sit around and have a conversation about, just simple stuff like, how should you eat, for example. We'll get there. We'll get there. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. So get out there and get active. Tag You're It. We'll see you on Monday. Have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.